Chapter 47:13. Jian Wushuang nodded and saw that Chunky's mood was not high, but he didn't say much. He carried him out of this lonely day together. Within the days of Xiao Gu, above the clouds of the sky, Jian Wushuang looked at him. Want to kill the little emperor to get revenge? Chuanqiu stunned, and then shook his head a little. Although he is also the guy I wish to kill on the spot, but compared to others, I would like to be the first to personally edge his emperor. Jian Wushuang knew that there must be a secret fortune in it. As long ago, he knew that Chuanqiu was not an ordinary cultivation, but the son of a former emperor of heaven. My emperor Fenghua Emperor died in the hands of Zhen Wuyang, and the entire heavenly court was destroyed. Finally, I was the only one left and became a prisoner. The past is long gone, but he is still entangled in spring and autumn like a chain, making him fall into anger all the time. Although he could not wait for Wuyang to be at the moment, sadly, he didn't even have the qualification to see him, and even heavenly court didn't know where. Jian Wushuang didn't say comfort, but put his palm on Chunky's shoulder and patted it gently. Chuanqiu glanced at him gratefully and said slowly, "Brother Jian, if it were not for your presence, I am afraid that I am still a prisoner in the dark Montenegro." Jian Wushuang said softly, "Living well and continuously improving your strength will make you one day able to fight the enemy." Chuanqiu nodded vigorously, "Brother Jian, rest assured, I believe there will be such a day." In addition, he hesitated suddenly and said after a moment, "Brother Jian, if there is one day, will you help him?" In the mouth of spring and autumn, he naturally refers to the little emperor. Jian Wushuang heard the words and shook his head without hesitation. "At that time, I am afraid that I have already left here. Everything you worry about will not happen. What you need most now is to continuously strengthen your own strength." Chuanqiu nodded, and then took the slap-sized 8-armed arms out of his arms, and returned them to the front of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang smiled and stretched his hand to push the 8 arms back. "This thing is not very useful to me. It can be used as a self-defense for you, but don't rely too much on it." Spring and autumn no longer quit, very carefully put his 8 arms back into his arms. "Chuanqiu, the emperor in your mouth is the realm after Yanxian. Is it just a title?" On this issue, Jian Wushuang has not inquired before, and today it suddenly sounded and he intends to ask. Although spring and autumn haven't set foot in Yanxian now, he is the son of a real emperor, so naturally he knows something better than Jian Wushuang. Chuanqiu heard the words and said carefully, "The emperor is actually a respectable title, not a realm, but a real watershed. From my childhood, when I heard the emperor's admonitions, I vaguely knew that I wanted to be an emperor, to have luck, to form the avenue of heaven, and to my own realm. And the most important step to become an emperor is to enter that level, but Chunky's memory seems a little vague. I seem to forget what level it is." Jian Wushuang nodded his head. He had long realized that the true souls of the 3 emperors he had contacted first had already taken the step of Yanxian. "I am afraid that if you want to become the emperor who created a heaven, the real thing is to step out of the mysterious realm of Yanxian. As for what realm there is, Jian Wushuang was blinded and could only move forward and realize it carefully. As far as he is concerned, with the shadow of the 3 emperors, it is enough to protect themselves from the powerful forces on either side. There is no big sun hanging over the sky of Xiaoyushan, but it has never been dark, and it will always be a quiet day, which is very similar to the scene in the sky down the mountain." It was only a few days after he had talked with spring and autumn at random, Jian Wushuang began to practice. He took out several kendo solitary books he had bought in Jingchuan Tianqing. Looking at the traces of the simple and vicissitudes of life, Jian Wushuang estimated the age of these solitary books. I am afraid that he would be tens of thousands of years old. There are 4 solitary books in total, and the ancient atmosphere sealed on it has been seriously worn away. Almost immediately, the imprint is gone with the wind. These 4 solitary books were all randomly selected by him from various Yanxian, and they are the oldest swordsmanship of this great Yanhuan. 3 of them are the most basic foundations for teaching kendo, which is of great benefit to those practicing kendo, and judging from the remaining atmosphere in these isolated books, the writers have reached the state of Yanxian when they created these kendos. Quickly absorbing the knowledge of kendo in 3 solitary books like a whale sucking water, Jian Wushuang finally looked at the last book. The 2 simple and fierce characters of Genji seemed to be written on the homepage at will with a straw stick dipped in ink. Jian Wushuang was a little puzzled. It seemed that he had forgotten which vendor he bought this solitary book from. He looked very unimpressed. Putting aside his distractions, he opened the first page with a wave of his hand. What came into view was a blank. On the yellowish paper glowing dark blue, not even half a word appeared. Jian Wushuang groaned in his heart. No, don't you encounter a profiteer here? He who did not believe in evil hurriedly looked up and down. Eventually it was concluded that the profiteers were cheated. This is simply a wordless book. Jian Wushuang couldn't help crying and laughing, and after exploring it again with his strength, and determined that it was worthless, he was ready to throw it away. However, at the next moment, there was a touch of warm and cold breath in his hand. If he did not observe it carefully, he would never find it. He looked subconsciously at the sword collection in his hand, a fairy-like atmosphere with extreme air just like a cloud of smoke, but just rotated a moment above the solitary book and instantly fell into the book. Seeing something, Jian Wushuang hurriedly opened the Wu Zi Tian Shu in his hand again. On the yellow paper with the dark blue color, the fairy air turned to the ultimate breath, like a finger-sized startled dragon, hovering above the paper. Jian Wushuang's eyes opened to the maximum, and some could not guess where this familiar and strange atmosphere came from. Soon, the breath of fine clouds suddenly condensed and instantly turned into a figure only the size of a fingernail. He held his breath completely, and the scene seemed a little strange at the moment. The thumb-sized figure is very compact, but the white shirt on her body looks magnificent and has the style of a generation of guru. Although this villain made up of Yun Yen has no facial features, but he showed a breath that made Jian Wushuang familiar and extremely familiar with the feeling of an old friend. Chapter 47:14. Jian Wushuang didn't dare to speak at all, and tried his best to hold his breath, fearing that he would blow this villain away with one breath. Standing on the yellow paper pages, the villain's white shirt fluttered in the wind, and then he moved. Rising in the wind, another cloud of smoke emerged in his hands as a real sword. The momentum changed, and this inch of Su Jianfang's book pages seemed to become a performance martial arts field. The villain in the most central position arbitrarily practiced one trick, stirred up the whole body. In Jian Wushuang's eyes, every style of this Yunyan villain is like a sword style after being dismantled and refined, and it is slowly and extremely practiced. The more he looked at it, the more shocked he felt that he could not ignore the sharpness and horror from this sword style. However, Jian Wushuang soon became immersed in it, fighting with the villain through the consciousness. 2 very different kendos collide in such an incredible way. If Chuanqiu is on the side of the sword Wushuang, you can certainly see a funny scene in this strange. Jian Wushuang frowned, holding a lone book spread out one page as if sitting on a boat. The figure swayed from side to side, and from time to time, there was a big flip, which was extremely funny. And this scene ended with the little man standing on the page of the book, standing upright and standing without a fancy sword. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes, a drop of sweat poured out from the temples, and hurriedly looked into the pages. The little man standing on the pages of the book seemed to have completed the task. The figure dissipated directly, and turned into a cloud of smoke, which fell on the pages of the book. Immediately afterwards, a more mysterious scene appeared. On the pages of the original book without words, Yun Yen was outlined by Yun Yen. This, how is it possible? Jian Wushuang was shocked to no avail. Through the game of Shenyu just now, he has been very clear that this Yun Yen villain is the Ding Bai transformation who had been in the Divine Power universe and talked to him about 100,000 years of swordsmanship. But how could his kendo villain appear here? There is no answer. As the last word stops, it represents Ding Bai's swordsmanship, which is finally fully integrated in the book. A total of 5 pages full of kendo analysis pages were rustled by the wind. Swallowing his dry throat, Jian Wushuang gazed at the page. With just a glance, his heart shuddered unstoppably. The The swordsmanship written on the page of the book is all the sword meaning of Sword Fairy Ding Baiyi's first type of absolute sword. It's too much. Isn't this book perfect? After being immersed in it for nearly a day, Jian Wushuang sent out a sigh of emotion. This sword set actually completely dissected Ding Baiyi's unique sword. I am afraid that even if Ding Baiyi personally wrote the description, it would not be so detailed. Jian Wushuang was so confused that he couldn't understand how such a wordless book had recorded Ding Baiyi's swordsmanship. 5 pages of paper all depict that type of sword, which shows how detailed it is. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang's ability to accept is extremely strong. After a short period of hesitation, Jian Wushuang practiced hungrily against the analysis of the pages. The more in-depth study, the more frightening the sword Wushuang, this inexplicably strange set of swords, almost Ding Baiyi's underpants have been pulled out. It's just that there is only Ding Baiyi's style, and then everything will be blank. What is the origin of this wordless book? Is it possible to reprint everyone's swordsmanship? Jian Wushuang closed the sword set, and the tone of tossing and turning looked. Then he subconsciously poured his own sword into it. The scene of Xian Qi happened again, and the cloud smoke transformed from Jian Wushuang's sword intentions was ever-changing, and finally it was also condensed into a pocket version of Jian Wushuang, and began to learn kendo while standing on the page. The unparalleled swordsmanship of the complete frame has been constructed, the starry lake, the lake and the sword, as if all the rivers and seas are poured on the pages of the book. This time, 10 full pages were covered with small prints, 5 pages with star-shaped swords and 5 pages with river-shaped swords. Jian Wushuang was dumbfounded and hurriedly scrutinized. In this light, his face was pale. The sword meaning engraved on the page of the book is almost nothing to describe the essence of the 2 styles of sword meaning, just like the thoughts of the sword Wushuang's consciousness, completely developed. It's terrible, what the is this? Jian Wushuangqiang endured the tremor in his heart and probed carefully. At this moment, the slightly strange sound of Chuanqiu sounded. Brother Jian, what's wrong with you? Holding a wordless book, I'm so happy and surprised. Jian Wushuang suddenly lifted up, looking to the side for a long time and a confused face. You mean no words? Chuanqiu nodded, then pointed at the sword without the book in both hands. Isn't this the wordless book, all blank? Jian Wushuang looked at the spread pages, and the books on kendo were densely recorded, but in spring and autumn, it was wordless. Are you sure this book is wordless? Jian Wushuang asked. Chuanqiu looked down and looked at him. It's indeed wordless. What's wrong with you, Brother Jian? Is there any stimulation? Jian Wushuang shook his head, and his mind seemed to be somewhat clear. This collection of swords seems to have the horror skills that can print all kinds of stunning kendo in it, and it seems that only users can see it. In other words, with this collection of swords, wouldn't it be possible to unscrupulously expand others' swordsmanship? Suppressing the restlessness in his heart, Jian Wushuang was about to open his mouth to return to spring and autumn, when a clear voice rang from Ziyagushin's enchantment. Brother Sword, Qin Qingta came here for a visit. In the rippling ripples, Qin Qing, who changed to a white shirt, appeared to be immortal. Jian Wushuang also stood up and smiled with a distant hand. Jinmo welcomes you here. Qin Qing smiled heartily again, and hurriedly stepped in front of Jian. Was double-sided. I haven't seen you in the last 10 days. The Sword Brothers are still the same martial arts as always. Brother Chen has praised, and has been neglecting to practice recently, and laughed. He responded with a bitter smile. For this familiar Qin Qing, although Jian Wushuang did not resent it, he also kept a distance between his subconscious mind. However, Qin Qing didn't seem to feel Jian Wushuang's estrangement, and smiled. Just as the little emperor's state has also stabilized, I came to this little lonely day to find the Sword Brothers to describe the old. After all, this little solitary sky is really good, full of vitality, and the spirit of the spirit is far beyond the ordinary realm. The Sword Brothers are practicing and sitting here, which will definitely be of great help. Jian Wushuang nodded. It's not bad. Jinmo just stayed here temporarily. I don't know the mystery. Chapter 47:15. Chen Qing smiled and said, "With the skill of the sword brothers, it is not difficult to ask the little emperor to play this little lonely day." Jian Wushuang also smiled. Chen Qing still didn't know that Xiao Dijuan had already given him this little orphan and big orphan together. Since he didn't know, he simply didn't answer. This is not something to show off, but a means of restraining the sword. Chen Qing didn't care about his silence. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Brother Sword, we are all idle today, why not discuss one or two?" Jian Wushuang wanted to decline, and again seemed to realize what he was, nodding and saying, "Follow you." "Good." Chen Qing answered, "Brother Sword, let's start now." When the words fell, Chen Qing retreated abruptly, rising from the top with a mighty force, running like a dragon above the sky dome, wantonly arrogant. Chunkius' face changed slightly, and he hurried forward, whispering, "Brother Jian, I can feel that the release of the surname Chen's dynamism will not stop here, and must not be treated with ordinary heart. Relax, we just discuss some swordsmanship, not a battle of life and death." Jian Wushuang replied. Chuanqiu nodded, and then quickly launched this battle circle. Thousands of centimeters, the grass is slightly covered. A real sword with the meaning of emerald green quietly appeared in Chen Qing's hands, making his whole person's breath change, just like the sword to be opened by the Tibetan front. Jian Wushuang also pulled out the broken tarot Excalibur at the waist and looked at the front calmly. The Tai Luo Excalibur, which was broken to the center of the sword, not only did not decline, but sent out a few excitement. Chen Qing's eyes narrowed slightly, and he reminded him aloud, "Brother Sword, only on kendo. Come on." Shen grasped the hilt and Jian Wushuang responded with a deep voice. How could he not know that Chen Qing was taking care of him? If the realm is completely released, I am afraid that this Chen Qing will never be lower than that of the whirling ancestors in the whirling days, or even pass it. There was no talking and there was a sense of killing. The whole square was 1,000 feet away, so quiet that the needle could be heard. At the next moment, Chen Qing took the lead. The whole figure was like an unstoppable arrow, carrying the mighty power, and went straight to the sword without stab. There was a burst of sonic booms in the space, and it was cracking quickly. The unremarkable straight stab was so fast that the spring in autumn that had been watching from afar didn't react, so he went straight to Jian Wushuang's chest and stabbed it. If this blow is in the middle, even if it is not dead, it will definitely be hit hard. However, Jian Wushuang was faster than him. As early as this straight sprint came, a broken sword body was blocked at the right time. Ching. The two swords fought, and a trembling burst out. Chen Qing, who flew through the sky, only felt that if the real sword tip in his hand met the mountain giant river, he could hardly score a half. Jian Wushuang also felt an incomparable great force, making him retreat half a step to relieve the force. Missing a hit, Chen Qing smiled and straightened his sword back. This short trial made some concepts in both minds. "Brother Sword, and watch me Chen Qing kendo." An arrogant voice resounded. In the next moment, a gang wind blew directly from within 1,000 feet of the body, and Jian Wushuang was in it, which was inexplicably a bit of a sense of crisis. The sky dome changed slightly, and the earth quietly sprang out of an inch of gully. Chen Qing held the hilt in both hands, and there seemed to be a sword floating in his eyes. Countless strands of pale blue sword intentions emerged from his body, and then all returned to the sky above the head, and a real sword was condensed. This kind of sword curtain that covers the sky is very familiar with Sword Wushuang. This is a kind of figurative sword, simple and easy to learn, suitable for group fighting. However, when the swordsmanship is equal or even higher than oneself, using this formula is equivalent to finding death and falling down. Jian Wushuang did not understand Chen Qing's intentions, but when he looked at the top of his head again, his gaze was fixed. I saw in the middle of the head, a giant sword almost called Jianshan, seemed to carry the mighty power of millions of mountains and rivers, and fell. It turned out that this unfolding sword curtain is a blind eye method. The real sword is the sword hidden in it. In the sword that could be called Jianshan directly fell down, Jian Wushuang's mouth slowly raised a smile. Boom! The whole small solitary land was trembling violently, and the vast Jianshan fell into the ground without any obstruction, and Jian Wuxuang's figure was also pressed under the sword mountain. All around, all collapsed. After seeing this scene, Chunkius' heart almost jumped out of his throat, and then he rushed forward. Qin Qing, who soared into the sky, was also trembling in the heart. Judging from the swordsmanship that Jian Wuxuang performed in Jingchuan Tiancheng, it was absolutely impossible to catch his first sword. But soon he seemed to realize something again, and he tapped his head anxiously. "This place is confused. Brother Sword is here to save you." Chen Qing recalled that Jian Wuxuang had fierce battles in Jingchuan dozens of days ago, and destroyed Jingchuan by his own efforts. It was certainly impossible to recover in this short period of time, and it was normal that he could not take his sword. "Don't be hit hard, otherwise the little emperor will not be able to bypass me." In my heart, when I was about to go to Jianshan, Chen Qing, a pure sword of extreme intentions rose from the sky. The whole Jianshan flashed out the most bright beams of hundreds of millions. "Married to death." Chen Qing was shocked, and then withdrew, and then looked at the top of Jianshan, which was rapidly collapsing. Above the top, a figure dressed in a black shirt ranger is sitting above, looking under the sky with a smile. The broken tarot Excalibur in his hand trembles unceasingly, and seems to have been unable to suppress it. At the next moment, when the entire Jianshan mountain completely collapsed, the sword Wuxuang fluttered down, holding the Tai Luo Excalibur, and the lightly written sword fell. If the sky falls on the Milky Way for 9 days, the entire sky dome burst under this heavy pressure. It seems to be endless, but it is a straightforward understatement, expanding thousands of miles in the sky, as if Tianwei is here. Qin Qing, who stepped on the earth, looked up at this scene, the right hand holding the real sword trembling slightly. That kind of majestic and extreme sword is exactly the sword he longed for the most, and it is also the most incredible sword that makes him today. It turned out that, besides that one, there are people who can practice kendo to such a terrible and ancient point. A flash of excitement flashed in Qin Qing's eyes, and the state that had been suppressed was also unconsciously climbing to the top again. He has made up his mind to use his peak state to collide and to enlighten the sword to make up for his swordsmanship. The terrible strength of Qin Qing has made Qin Qing's breath rise to an impossible level. It seems that even the ancestors who were about to break through Yanxian were not their opponents. The real sword in his hand issued a red on, pointing directly at the sky dome. Heaven and Earth. Chapter 47:16. Spring and Autumn, who was running fast, only felt like he was hit by a heavy punch in the head, and the whole person flew out directly. As he flew out, the tremendous power of the earth burst completely. Like the ringing of the eternal clock, the polar day that can't be looked at directly lights up. Spring and Autumn was horrified, but found that in its own realm cannot escape the horror shock wave. At this moment he only felt a strong wind blowing on his back, like a big palm, firmly supporting his figure. Chuanxiu looked unconsciously behind him and saw a luxurious emperor with a pale complexion, and the purple robe that remained unchanged forever. I don't know when he was standing behind him. The tremendous strength enveloped the three of them, and turned them into an enchantment to stop the terrible martyrdom. "Mate, guess who loses and win?" Xiao Daijin's expression did not fluctuate, and he looked slowly in front of him. The thin purple robe raised his head, and his unclear eyes looked at the center of martyrdom. "Qin Qing, he has lost." In this simple dialogue, the martyrdom produced by the martyrdom slowly dissipated, and a huge crater on the other side appeared. On the two sides of the giant pit, there are two figures. The sword has no double-sided color and no waves. The black shirt seems to be covered with dust only on the dress, and the Tai Luo Excalibur in his hand is trembling. On the other side, although Qin Qing's figure was a bit embarrassed, the excited and belligerent man's in his eyes grew stronger. His heart is very clear. If it was not the realm that was just released, Jian Wuxuang's blow, with his first style of sword, it would be impossible to catch it. But what about that? Today he will try out all the swordsmanship of Jian Wuxuang by himself, and try his best to turn it into his own. After all, it is almost impossible to meet another person like Kuang Xianxian. The sharp breath surged again. If Qin Qing was still in the state of being in front of Tibet when he was the first sword, then now, he is already full of strength. At this time, Jian Wushuang said the word far away. 2 swords. Chen Qing's eyes narrowed, a sword far beyond his previous body floated around him, and at the same time, one side was like the sun's light wheel, and a figure appeared behind him. This time, it was still Chen Qing who took the lead. Huang's general momentum rose in an instant, and in that light wheel, it was actually agitating Wanshan lightsaber. The light wheel rotates, and a light sword with a handle around the red-gold pattern is like a giant wave, and the head is smashed towards the sword. Jian Wushuang is very speechless, he can't figure it out. Although Chen Qing's swordsmanship is not very strong, it should be enough to stand proudly. But at the moment, the spirit of the sword he released, although magnificent, was too broad, but he lost his subtlety, causing Jian Wushuang to see his weakness at a glance. The swordsmanship practiced by Chen Qing is tolerant and magnificent, but overall weak. Jian Wushuang moved forward, carrying an invisible sword, facing the wall almost composed of sword blades, a sword stabbed. This sword is an absolute sword written by Ding Bai, which discards everything and his own sword. A barely subtle white on flashed, and the weak point of the sword tapped the water like a fish. A layer of ripples wafted slightly. This sword is a mixture of hundreds of thousands of swords. Along with the ripples, one gem shattered and the glory shattered. Carrying the light wheel, Chen Qing shivered slightly at the moment when the sword of Huang was broken. He seemed to smell a familiar breath, and the memory that was so long gone was quietly pouring into his heart. The little emperor and the thin purple robe around him couldn't conceal their eyes at the moment. So much so that when Jian Wushuang's awe-inspiring sword chopped off Chen Qing's strands of hair, he let him recover. "You are strong. I have lost in kendo." A bitterness appeared on Chen Qing's face. On the 2 swords in a row, he lost completely. Jian Wushuang did not put away the long sword in his hand, but instead looked at Chen Qing with a smile, not caring about his unfair actions before. "Brother Chen, let's discuss with each other, regardless of winning or losing, only talking about kendo. If I guess well, you should have a sword." Chen Qing heard the words, his eyes lighted up and then dimmed again. "Brother Sword guessed right, but my sword is still just a frame, and it has not been through. If kendo doesn't go through any practice, then it's just a frame after all. This is the case with the practice of wuzui." Jian Wushuang whispered, and then his wrist shook, and the invisible long sword trembled. Chen Qing's eyes were fiery, and his militant intentions rose again. "Then Chen Mao will be ugly." The words fell, and the real sword in his hand quietly shook, the earth shook, and the gully was ravaged. 10 paths like the dark blue sword of the heavenly giant column ripped open the ground, rising like a frightened dragon. Chen Qingning stood in the same place, his real sword pointed directly at the sky dome, and the 10 magnificent giant ons made everything dark blue. Jian Wushuang stood in the void, looking at the front calmly, and then the invisible sword was thrown into the air by him. At the next moment, 10 dark blue sword-inspired giant pillars, wrapped in all powers, intertwined with each other, and covered the sky and the town. At the same time, the invisible sword that was thrown in the air was quietly decomposed and transformed into hundreds of thousands of swords. Jian Wushuang's hands were behind his back, and then hundreds of thousands of sword intentions condensed under him, like the galaxy in the sky. The little emperor who watched from afar, his eyes narrowed slightly, and there seemed to be a faint smile in the corner of his mouth. After seeing Jian Wushuang better than the previous sword intention, Chen Qing's intensely intense gaze has been replaced by bitterness. This is just the sword of the frame, it seems that it will die before it is created. Jian Wushuang stepped on Tianhe, his eyes were extremely calm from beginning to end. Under the imminent collision of the two, everything seemed to stagnate for a moment. There was no tremendous sound, but only a slight whisper like a clear spring. Chen Qing froze. The sword meaning that belongs to Jian Wushuang disappeared, and disappeared at the moment of the collision. The sword intention exuding a magnificent dark blue color, without hindrance, finally burst into the sky. Everyone unconsciously stretched out their hands to cover their eyes, and then gazed at them again. Jian Wushuang didn't know when to appear on the ground, His right hand pressed the handle of the Tai Luo Excalibur between his waists and nodded slightly toward Qin. Everyone saw it really. In this last confrontation, Jian Wushuang dispersed himself on that day and did not contend with it. This represents the completion of Qin's kendo. Qin recovered and solemnly arched the sword Wushuang. Thank you, Brother Jian. He knew very well that if the sword intention of Jian Wushuang had just fallen, he would have no chance of victory. Chapter 47:17. Not only is there no chance of winning, but kendo will be extremely likely to be in vain, and staying in this framework irreparably. Jian Wushuang dispersed the sword that would win, and completed Qin's sword heart. Qin's swordsmanship is not stunning, but if its momentum is magnificent, it has a sense of detachment, and Jian Wushuang can't bear to destroy it, so he stopped. But the power of the three swords has completely left an indelible stroke in Qin's heart. At this moment, a lazy applause came from a distance. Jian Wushuang stared at it, only to realize that it was Xiao Dijuan and others. Stepping into the air, Chuanqiu took the lead in a hurry and gave him a thumbs up. Brother Jian, great. Jian Wushuang smiled, and then looked at the little emperor. Thank you, Jianxiong, for letting me see such a shockingly brilliant sword. Xiaodijan smiled. Young Master Yen admire. Something? Returning to peace, Jian Wushuang said. The little emperor said, It is not a matter to say that it is a thing, but I just want to talk to the older brother Jianxiu. Qin scratched his head. Little emperor, I'm really embarrassed to make you a little lonely like this. Now this little solitary sky is not mine. Even the big solitary sky is handed over to brother Jian. You should ask him whether he blames you or not. Xiao Dijuan glanced at Jian Wushuang Road. Qin Qingdeng understood immediately. Brother Sword, this little solitary sky is already yours? Jian Wushuang shook his head and said, It's just a temporary stay, not the possession of Jianmo. It will be returned as soon as the time comes. Qin also understands people. In order not to make the atmosphere too embarrassing, he hurriedly said, Brother Sword, on the sword just now, Chen Mao admires the 5-body investment. You are definitely I have seen, except for the old friend. Outside the kendo first. Brother Chen, I praise it, I just have some experience. There is still a way to go before I can truly understand kendo. Jian Wushuang responded lightly. Qin was quite emotional. Yeah, I thought I had planned to practice kendo at the beginning, but I was helpless with a dull, seemingly simple kendo. I haven't seen it until now. Such illusory things are far more than cultivation. In my opinion, it's harder. Jian Wushuang did not answer. He seemed to have never stopped at a certain moment in his perception of kendo, and then stagnated, and naturally there was no resonance. The atmosphere is subtle, and if there is another Qin chattering, I am afraid that Jian Wushuang will leave on the spot. Qin, I'll take you to Degushan for a turn. The thin purple robe who hadn't spoken suddenly said. Qin, who was talking about the excitement, waved his hand. I have nothing to say about Degushan, I have turned it more than 10 times. Then he realized that it was not right again, and suddenly he closed his voice, and said with a serious face, Yes, I haven't seen it in Degushan, it is really time to check it out. Sword brothers, take care. After arching his hand, Qin quickly left Xiaogushan with the thin purple robe. At this moment, there were only 3 people left in this little solitary day. Chuanqiu, please go sit down first. Jian Wushuang looked at Chuanqiu and said. Chuanqiu nodded and heard a word of caution before moving away. Let's walk around together at random, come back from Jingchuan, this is the first time we meet. Xiao Dijuan said. Jian Wushuang nodded, and then the two proceeded slowly. In mid-air, feeling the strong dynamism surging around him, his tight nerves were relaxed. Jingchuan was destroyed, and my power has weakened a little bit. You should know some of these things, such as who sent me the guys who killed me. Said Xiao Yujun Yuyu. Jian Wushuang said softly, when I returned, my partner around you said something to me, and I knew a little bit. The little emperor nodded. Then you have to prepare, there are still 5 years left, when I want you to go to the banquet with me. Go to the banquet? His eyes suddenly became a bit cold. Yes, My emperor invited, it was a feast of heaven, and then those animals will go with them. Jian Wushuang nodded, but he really wanted to see what kind of existence the so-called heavenly court and emperor in the great Yanhuan belonged to. You plan to kill them at the banquet? Jian Wushuang asked. Little emperor sneered. They? A group of self-sufficient waste? Just let them go for the time being. I need to do much more than that. In 5 years, I will come to you when the time comes. You can also go to Degushan to practice. I am here. The little emperor's eyes were scorching, and he said seriously, if you don't have you next, I will surely be helpless, so please stand by me anyway. Jian Wushuang's inexplicable feeling was a bit unnatural. I'm sure I can't say anything. After hearing the exact answer, Xiaodijin left with a big smile, leaving 8 words on the occasion of leaving. You have everything to do as a guarantee. At this point, the entire lonely day was completely silent. Seeing Xiaodijin's figure disappearing outside the enchantment, Chuanqiu quickly came to Jianhui's double-faced front road. Won't this guy be paying attention again? Jian Wushuang did not conceal, and said that he was going to heaven and feast 5 years later. Chuanqiu said anxiously, I know this guy's temperament, he has so many discordant brothers, he will inevitably bleed and fight. Then brother Jian, do you really want to blend in? Jian Wushuang shook his head, go step by step, and wait until I figure it out here, and it's not too late to leave. In short, everything is careful, he is far more gloomy than the surface, and he is not a good person, Chuanqiu said solemnly. At first, he was just a hard-working man. I can't escape from him. If his 6 younger brothers were really wicked, then he would be no better. Hearing Chunkius' warning, Jian Wushuang nodded, and he had his own judgment. From the perspective of so many prisoners trapped in the next 3 days, that little emperor is naturally not a good person. What Jian Wushuang can do now is to protect himself to the utmost extent, and then he slowly explores it. After discussing with Chuanqiu for another half-day, the two stepped into the pavilion of this lonely heaven together. This little solitary sky is not a vast expanse, but it is many times larger than a star field in the divine universe. At the same time, except for some exotic beasts in the wild forest, few people set foot in it. In the center of the entire Xiaogushan, there is a grand palace. Stepped into this silent palace, Jian Wushuang looked at it, and then he sat down. The long wind blew past slowly, and Jian Wushuang sat on the square outside the palace pavilion, voicing his strength. There are 18 copper columns on the left and right of the square covered with solemn copper, which is vaguely similar to the original Yunshao Palace. Chapter 47:18. Jian Wushuang looked at it for another 4 weeks before he finally settled in. From the past of the Divine Force universe, he became an immortal from the ancestor level. However, with the strength of his Yanxian realm, during the several years after he entered Dayanhuan, he did not meet the time of life and death. Even Zhuhai Tianzhang and the whirling ancestors of Wu Tian did not give him a real fear of life and death. Jian Wushuang vaguely guessed that it would be the watershed to really take that step out of the realm of Yanxian. Not long after sitting in Dingwu, he seemed to realize something again, and reached out and walked out of the arms without the word. Turning over the first 15 pages of the book full of small prints, Jian Wushuang's gaze stayed on page 16, but there was nothing but blank. Shouldn't it? I was talking about Qin with the sword just now? Why is there nothing in this book? With a somewhat skeptical attitude, Jian Wushuang tried to transfer the battle memory in the consciousness out of array. The wisp of consciousness soon sank into the pages of the book. Without disappointing Jian Wushuang, this consciousness of cloud smoke began to be written directly, and the regular small prints appeared on the blank pages. And this time the writing speed is extremely fast, almost tens of breaths, and I have all finished writing. The number of pages has changed from the original number of pages to a thin one. No, Qing's kendo, there are so few places to write? Jian Wushuang was a little unbelievable, quickly looked through it, and after confirming that there was really only 1 page, some could not laugh or cry. But then, a more mysterious scene appeared, that Qin Qingjiando, which was originally only 1 page, disappeared line by line. It's like there is a pair of big hands in the midst, which is erasing. No, what's this operation? Jian Wushuang secretly wondered, wouldn't this Jianji despise Chunqing's kendo, so it was erased again? Without an answer, Jian Wushuang could only watch Chunqing's kendo and disappeared completely. It's a really weird sword collection. He looked at the loan book in his hand and at the same time thought that if he meets a guy like Ding Bai in the future, wouldn't he be able to print it and steal the teacher? Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. This sword set is simply the ultimate treasure. The predecessor who created this sword set is probably an interesting guy. After personally collecting the sword set, Jian Wushuang took the seat. For 5 years, for him, it was not even as long as the fishing in the Yunshao Palace. He strives to adjust the dynamism and state to the peak state in these 5 years, in order to deal with everything that happens next. The Bo Yang bottle was also opened, and the 3 emperors just returned to the bottle and fell asleep after wandering around in a small orphan day. Everything was spent in gentleness. Jian Wushuang did not know what was waiting for him next, and was forced to accept it. Undercurrents often seem to be calm, undercurrents surge. 5 years but flashed away. When Jian Wushuang's hairs rushed out again, the Xuanhe streamer transformed from Yanli reemerges, and Xiao Gudian's enchantment is opened. The little emperor who had disappeared from his extravagant clothes was replaced with a kimono symbolizing the emperor. On this dark golden monastery, each stroke of the needle threading depicts mountains, rivers and lakes, symbolizing the meaning of Bona. And on its collar, 2 dark-eared symmetrical thin-eared animals were inlaid with dark gold thread. This kimono made the little emperor lose a little bit of the charm of boys and girls, and a little more hero and martial arts, but the pale paleness on his face could not be concealed. Behind him stood nearly 1,000 figures. Little emperor, I'm going to invite Brother Sword to come. Qin Qinggong shouted, and then suddenly stopped when he set off. You are waiting here, I can just go there. After leaving this sentence, Xiaodijin went to the depths of Xiaogushan alone. A little envy appeared in Chunqing's eyes. Brother Sword is really awesome. I haven't seen one person with this treatment for so many years. The thin purple robe slightly raised his gaze, looked at Xiao Daijin's distant figure, and dropped his eyelids again. Seemingly, Jian Wushuang, who was sitting in Wuwu, slowly opened his eyes and saw a figure coming. Brother Jian, Gong Ziyan came to visit. Xiao Dijuan smiled and stopped on the square. Spit out a muddled breath, Jian Wushuang stood up and nodded. It is considered to have seen. Looking up and down at the swordsmanship, the little emperor said with interest, How is the recovery? Not bad, when will you leave? All ready, just waiting for you. Jian Wushuang nodded, and Chuanqiu also walked out of the palace and stood behind him. When he was about to leave, Xiaodijin suddenly stopped him, then stretched out his hand and stuffed a set of clothing to Jian Wushuang. Put it on. The group of embroidered ladies in Desiyu tailored it. It's not bad. Jian Wushuang was quite helpless, and was not easy to attack, so he had to rush into the palace and change his clothes. A moment later, the sword that changed into a long suit with silver silk embroidery thread on its front appeared. Although he was extraordinary and handsome in the clothes, it made him feel uncomfortable, which was far less comfortable than the black shirt ranger. Little Emperor's eyes showed satisfaction, and then turned to open the way. Brother Jian, I don't see it. You are not much worse than the Emperor. Chuanqiu looked up and down at Jian Wushuang, and envy flashed in his eyes. Don't talk nonsense. This dress doesn't suit me very well. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly, quietly loosened his belt, and then stepped forward. Chuanqiu scratched his head. It's really a bit like my emperor's figure. It's really strange. He would never have thought that this young man beside him, who was silent and quiet but seemed to have an inexhaustible story, was once a cosmic god. A total of more than 1,000 ancestor-level top repairers, 20 Yenxian, condensed in the void at this moment. The real fangs that he has been hiding have been revealed to Jian Wushuang. Outside of the Six Heavens realm, in the emptiness of Desiyu, the little emperor's rare and calm gaze slowly swept over the figures standing in front of him. And at this moment, the entire Big Siyu's void began to scream. A monster that Zun Wushuang had never seen stepped on the moving clouds and came by the wind. Such strange beasts, such as dragons like sheep, with curved corners and thin ears, are engraved on the body with golden scales, and they are quite mysterious while they can't tell the weirdness. A total of 20 strange beasts and 10 imperial garrisons reach. On top of each imperial dragon, there is a banner engraved with yen characters. For a long time, the little emperor's calm but full of prestigious voice resounded throughout the entire division. Everyone with the son of Yen, go to heaven and go to the banquet. Chapter 47:19. No one spoke, all stood. Each of them has followed the little emperor's side since his indefinite years, without having to say a word, to know its meaning. The intention to kill is skyrocketing. The thin purple robe walked out of the array, holding the palm of the little emperor, and sent him into one of the 10 imperial courts. The remaining 9 vehicles are suspect cars that serve as a deceptive role. After sending the little emperor into the imperial court, the thin purple robe turned back and looked at Jian Wushuangdo, and follow me. Jian Wushuang had no doubt about him, and after looking at each other with Chuanqiu Chenqing and others, he went straight to Yong. After being pushed into the chariot by the thin purple robe, Jian Wushuang only saw that Xiao Dijuan was also among them. He was embarrassed and had to quit. Brother Jian, let me stay here. I let my partner let you in here. Xiaodijan beckoned. I'm not sure if there is any danger on this journey, so I'm going to let you go. Jian Wushuang nodded and then sat in this luxurious chariot. Chuanqiu and Chenqing and the rest of the Yanxian all entered the other 9 imperial palaces. The remaining more than 1,000 ancestors did not follow up together, but kept up with more than 100 to act as ceremonies, and the rest were scattered throughout the entire division. With the preparation of the personnel, a total of 10 imperial dragons rose by the wind. The monsters like dragons and sheep stepped on the clouds, and every step was 100 million miles away. Although the speed is so terrible, sitting in the imperial wing is a little bit bumpy. At this moment, this is enough to accommodate dozens of people in the imperial court, only sitting Jian Wushuang and Xiaodijan. The atmosphere was awkward, and Jian Wushuang simply closed his eyes and pondered. With the clouds of smoke rising from the golden furnace, the entire Yulong has also become an excellent place for spiritual practice. Brother Jian, it will take a few months to go. If nothing happens, just take a rest and rest. Xiao Dijuan reminded. Jian Wushuang nodded, yes. At this point, this long distance has entered a silent stage. The imperial princes who walked through the void passed through the void world and marched towards the most mysterious place. The 6 emperor realms of the little emperor are just the 6 general universes in the big domain, and beyond the scope of the big domain, the world is even more vast. The heavenly court, known as Emperor Weiyang, could not be reached. Jian Wushuang was really curious about this legendary figure who basically lived in the verbal abuse of the 3 emperors. What kind of horrible existence should be able to destroy the emperor bodies of the 3 emperors and the heavenly court with one's own strength? And the Emperor Fenghua, emperor of the spring and autumn period, also fell into the hands of Zhen Weiyang, and there are only 4 people who know the sword Wushuang alone. Perhaps this kind of emperor should know something. Jian Wushuang secretly thought about the next step in his heart, and unconsciously, it had been almost 20 days. I do not know whether it is in a dream, or when he is awake, he feels a surging crisis. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes violently, and Xiao Dijuan opened his eyes at the same time. Is this group of grotesques crazy, and dare to kill here? Really, the seat is muddy. The little emperor said coldly, even if he would step out. Jian Wushuang reached out to hold him in a timely manner, and said in a deep voice, "Don't go out first, just watch its changes." He nodded slowly, and the strength of his hands quietly surfaced. At the next moment, a surging force of extreme strength broke through the void, and burst directly in these 10 imperial dragons. Jian Wushuang only felt that the space around him suddenly swelled up, and then the imperial lord in front of him shattered. The 3 Yanxian who were sitting in the Yuqi were hit the spot. No longer able to watch its changes, Jian Wushuang rushed out of the imperial court directly, and stood in the void. Chuanqiu, Chenqing and others quickly moved closer together. "Brother Sword, how is Xiaodijan?" Chenqing said with a real sword. "I'm fine." A gloomy voice sounded, and the little emperor stepped out slowly. Jian Wushuang's eyes were slightly condensed. He felt the strong breath that came from all directions, no less than 40. In the void adorned with stars, it really encloses more than 40 yenxian. 20 to 40 is at a great disadvantage. But Qin Qing and other yenxian still surrounded the little emperors in the first time. Immediately afterwards, a faint-faced yenxian stepped forward and pointed to the little emperor. "Leave him behind, I can put you on a path of life, or the offender, die." "Who sent you? Gongzi Jiao or Gongzi Yu?" Shao Emperor Xinxing asked. That yenxian smiled again. "What is the use of the dead to know more? But you still have a way to live. As long as you return to the same path, I promise not to hurt you alone." Little Emperor sneered. "Are you really so sure? Just eat me like that? Of course, as long as I think, it is impossible for all of you now to leave alive." In a word, the entire void seemed to become a quagmire, and the original vast force directly rolled towards the little emperor and others. Jian Wushuang snorted, and the invisible long sword in his hand was directly cut open and surrounded, and everything returned to its original state. Seeing this scene, Yan Xian, who was still grinning, stunned, and then said, "I think you are just a group of people, but I still have some tolerance." Chen Qing heard that he immediately took a step forward and directly released the magnificent and powerful force. His realm is rising. Even Jian Wushuang feels that Chen Qing's realm seems to be far more than Yenxian. All the Yenxian who surrounded the front changed their faces, hands on. Boom, boom. A total of more than 40 Yenxian fully released the terror of the extreme. The void is rapidly collapsing, and the rallying power is like shooting from a train. Chen Qing stretched out his hand, and suddenly a barrier of strength surrounded the crowd, blocking the terrifying power. Jian Wushuang no longer hesitates, directly evokes the invisible sword and moves forward. This barrier could not last long, even though Chen Qing's realm showed signs of breakthrough, but he was still Yenxian, and he could not protect himself under the siege of so many Yenxian. Therefore, Jian Wushuang took the lead to set off, killing the most immortal Yenxian in as much time as possible. 40 Yenxian were many times more in that interception in the Jingchuan Tianqing. The little emperor's eyes are about to bleed. This time and again the interception is far beyond imagination, and there is no emotion left at all. "Young master, if I live, I will kill you first." Void Tremor, led by Jian Wushuang, a total of 60 Yenxian, start fighting here. With a sword forced to retreat in front of him, Jian Wushuang directly threw out a celestial gate, so as to hit all the enemies who dare to move forward. Chapter 4720. One Yenxian was unable to retreat, was crushed into powder by the Chuanjia Tian men on the spot, and the Xianyuan was broken. The battlefield of Jiaozh was immediately vacated, and more than a dozen Yenxian all looked at Jian Wushuang vigilantly. That kind of Zhuangqi's magical power is so vast. On the other side, Qin Qing opened a ring of killing, and each blow was enough to hit several Yenxian who dare to run forward. But Rao is so, these Yenxian under the small emperor's seat are still showing their fatigue. How can 20 be against 40? Without the help of the 3 emperors, Jian Wushuang stood up to several Yenxian undefeated at the most, but now he was surrounded by no less than 10. He alone attracted a quarter of the firepower, very depressed. "Keep your head, obediently, I can make you suffer less." A force of vigorous force hit Sword Muzu. The sword in his hand reversed, and the sword tore the offensive. The sword smiled disdainfully. "On the basis of the shameless wastes of you, can I take my head?" For the first Yanxian's face, and then a move in both hands, a total of 11 Yenxian worked together, and the sky covered the sky like the power of the entire void, and the cover pressed. Jian Wushuang's eyes were dignified when he first raised up a force to block, and then lifted the sword straight up. Absolute sword. A sword can be regarded as 100,000 sword, with a broken face. Boom! Thousands of streamers burst into flames, and Jian Wushuang, holding a long sword, moved forward. Nagdamang was split in half from the middle and was quickly dissipating. And Jian Wushuang was also extremely uncomfortable at this moment. The combined effort of these 11 Yenxian was not what he could bear. In this, The skin surface seemed to start to burn. "Brother Jian, I'll help you." With a cry, Chuanqiu manipulated his 8 arms with anger and rushed straight ahead. The 8 giant arms rang with the sword Wushuang in the cover of the sky. Jian Wushuang only felt a slack in his body, and all his strong eyes were gone. Spring and autumn came to him. Xinsheng said quickly, "Brother Jian, let's retreat, 40 yenxian, we will continue to stalemate like this, we must die 10 lives." "Can't go." Jian Wushuang's brows were slightly twisted. He had his own set of life rules. If he left in this way, it would be a disaster for Qin Qing, Xiaodijin, and others. Without retreat, morale is the first thing to hit. In any case, he can't retreat today. Stretching his hands to separate the huge power from the impact again, Jian Wushuang turned back and pushed Chuanqiu into the protective circle. He is just an ancestor. Even if he has 8 arms of anger, he will directly die in Yangxian's offensive if he is a little careless. The only thing Jian Wushuang can do now is to try to protect it behind him. There are constant Yanxian decay, and the power of such existence can destroy the world between hands, not to mention that there are nearly 60 Yanxian players. The void is torn, and the planes and worlds that are slightly closer are also affected and continue to collapse. Nearly 100 ancestors were killed by the town as early as the beginning, and the immortals brought by the little emperor were also rapidly decreasing. Several people have long been the end of a strong crossbow. Even if Qin Qing has reached the peak of his strength, he is also weak in the face of so many Yanxian. A sword of Xinghe Lake and the sea emerged, reluctantly blocking the crowd of Yanxian who threw again. Jian Wushuang and others had been encircled. At this point, there were only 8 Yanxian left besides Xiaodijin. Qin Qing's right arm was scarred, especially on his right rib. The scars were shocking. These wounds caused by the same Yanxian are difficult to heal in a short time, which also means that the combat power will be reduced to a certain extent. Looking at Yanxian, who still has nearly 25 or 6, Jian Wushuang and others were all sinking into their hearts. "Little Emperor, after I leave, I will return to the 6-day realm and stop reaching the heavens." Qin Qing whispered, "Only alive can we continue to fulfill our long-cherished wish. Brother Sword, the safety of the little emperor will please you." He looked at Jian Wushuang. The Sword Emperor hadn't even spoken yet. The little emperor said coldly, "Qin Qing, when do you need to decide this matter?" Qin Qing was anxious. "But if you don't leave the little emperor, you can't go away. As a successor emperor, I have to go to the heavenly court. Even if I die on the road, I can't change it." Shao Emperor's voice was indifferent, and his eyes were dead. "Oh, the successor emperor, a waste that can only be cultivated, but can't be enlightened, dare to call the successor emperor?" The first one was a soft-looking Yanxian who disdainfully sneered, and more than 20 Yanxian behind him also laughed at the moment. "Stand up. Master, just give it to me." The thin purple robe lowered his head slightly, and was taken by the little emperor while taking a step. Just let the waste in his mouth send him on the road. His voice was indifferent, but he swept up with a deep dignity. The next moment, fight again. A field filled with dark colors sprang up, and the little emperor was in it, as if to become the emperor who truly controlled the party. Destroy the Master Yen Yen reward. Instead of being afraid, the soft-looking Yanxian didn't be afraid, but instead smiled with a ghostly figure and rushed directly to the little emperor. One sword pierced one of Yangxian's pipa bones, Jian Wushuang sank with a sigh, and Qi Tianyan's force slammed forward. Tianman's terrible power of terror came again. However, all the terrifying Yanxian who had already been taught, all stopped together, and under the full blow of Jian Wushuang, there was no casualties. Jian Wushuang's heart sank fiercely, but he immediately raised his invisible sword and rushed forward. Various supernatural powers blasted on him. Even the indelible body began to be injured. The little emperor released the realm, and with one blow, he destroyed a Yanxian, but then was blocked by the rest of Yanxian. Qin Qing and others also managed to protect themselves. A shocking wound began to appear on everyone just as this fierce battle was about to be completely besieged by Jian Wushuang and others. From the boundless void, there was a sudden burst of sky. Jian Wushuang almost subconsciously grabbed the little emperor in front of him, then slammed back. Zheng! A horror that easily breaks the void cuts through the sky. As if the sky and the sky are open, hundreds of thousands of miles of the void are splitting the void like a deep prison under this blow. Almost at the same time of retreating, that I don't know where it came from, but with a direct cut of destruction, he came to crush the sky. There are more than a dozen Yanxian who have no time to dodge, and immediately the figure becomes powder, and the fairy source turns into nothingness. This dreadful and terrifying sword directly plowed the void into a gullies of nothingness. Dead silence, the extreme dead silence, all the surviving Yanxian froze at this moment. Chapter 47:21. With a sword of hundreds of millions of miles, the power of Huang Huang poured out. It is impossible for anyone other than Yanxian to be able to cause damage to either side of the world in this great Yanhuan. Even Jian Wushuang, when destroying Jingchuan in the beginning, could only use the power of the three emperors to destroy it. This shows the difficulty. What kind of existence is this sword capable of extinguishing hundreds of millions of voids? A bunch of guys who don't know the sky and the ground, do you know to protect the environment? A very impatient voice resounded in the void. Jian Wushuang gazed at the source of the sound and saw a hazy figure standing far away. Even if it was so far away, he could feel the pressure of a transcendental cognition. However, this figure glowing dimly only appeared for a moment, and then disappeared directly. This is just a warning. If you dare to destroy anything and treat everything as nothing, then all will disappear. The sound of prestige rang through the void, and it took a long time to disappear. Such a terrible sword, such a mysterious figure, were just shocked and eventually disappeared. Looking at this sword mark that ripped through the void of hundreds of millions of miles, all Yanxian twitched at the corners of their mouths, which was too domineering. This sword of indiscriminate attack directly beheaded nearly 20 Yanxian. If it wasn't for the sword Wushuang's great attack, he would hold back the little emperor and retreat. Recovering from the shock, looking at the dozen or so Yanxian left in front of him, Jian Wushuang's mouth sneered a sneer. It was originally a one-sided suppression situation. Under the sword of the mysterious man, it was directly reversed. With the addition of Jian Wushuang, Xiao Dijuan still has 6 Yanxian, an ancestor level left, and only 12 Yanxian left. He and Chen Qing alone can hardly resist the 12 Yanxian, not to mention the help of Xiaodigen and the thin purple robe. The Yinru Yanxian, who had no heart to fight anymore, shouted for a quick retreat after trembling, and he fled regardless of his preparation. A very dark vine, as if growing from nothingness, quietly clinging to him with a rich death. The void around him seemed to stagnate, and even the strength of the body was stiff. The great terror between life and death made this feminine Yanxian horrified. "Come on, save me!" But the rest of the Yanxian who fled in vain, no one looked at him, all scattered in the void, disappeared. What awaits him is an extremely horrifying god of extreme horror. In Ro Yanxian turned back hard, and couldn't even speak. "Open your mouth and stick your tongue out." The little emperor looked somber, holding a real sword. He heard the words, bored it in his heart and rejoiced. His tongue was cut, and it can grow up to thousands of years, at least one life can be left. Immediately, this In Ro Yanxian sticks out her tongue, confusingly said, "More? Thank you, little emperor." The blade was cut across, and a tongue was cut off directly. He groaned, the blood spewed in his mouth. Before he closed his mouth, another sword directly pierced his face, and the terrifying diffusivity emerged from the blade of the sword, and the whole head and the fairy source were crushed. Jian Wushuang stepped back half a step, frowning slightly. This little emperor's heart is too heavy, so it can be seen. Without the head and the immortal source of immortality, the fairy fell silently into the void of the void. Throughout the void, only a few fragments of Yanxian's remains remained floating silently. When the real sword entered the sheath, the little emperor slowly turned around, raised his eyebrows and glanced at Jian Wushuang. Then he passed out directly. The thin purple robe seemed to have been expected, hugged the little emperor, and ran straight to the unbroken imperial dragon. Chen Qing smiled bitterly. The old problem has been committed again. Without any meaningless questioning, Jian Wushuang rushed to the other imperial princes with Chuanqiu. In this fierce battle, there were only 3 barely usable 10 of the 10 imperial battleships, but they were small ear-like beasts like dragons and sheep, with few casualties. Chen Qing was lagging behind after waving his gloves, and then left to move on. Halfway through the interception, there were only 6 people left, which is not terrible. If the mysterious man didn't cross his hand, I'm afraid that today would be another 9-death situation. At this moment, even Jian Wushuang was a little puzzled. How did he live to the present under the interception of layers? Only Yuchen was traveling when Yu Yong moved forward, sitting with Jian Wushuang. I said, Brother Jian, is there any hidden illness in Gongziyan? Did you see it just now? This is the second time. Chuanqiu whispered. Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and then said, do not rule out this possibility. According to these 3 and 5 interceptions, it is already a miracle to survive. Chuanqiu heard the words and held his forehead with his hands. I really can't believe it. I, who wanted to put him to death, stood on the same line with him at the moment. Jian Wushuang smiled. When the time is right, let's not leave too late. It can only be like this. Chuanqiu nodded helplessly, and then whispered, however, we know that he has a dark disease and it's easy to deal with. If one day he really wants to tear his face, he can also be hit hard. He shook his head and stopped talking. There was only a faint roar of wind blowing in his ears. It was a journey of more than 20 days in a row, and there was no accident in the following journey. The void that appears nothingness around is gradually being replaced by the sky filled with vast power on one side. It is so rich that it becomes solid, and the breath of life is in the void. Colorful shadows span across the heavens and set up on this side of the heaven. Walking through this place makes people feel dreamy and relaxed. Waving his hand to open the curtain in front of the window, after seeing this scene, Rao Shijian Wushuang all sighed. The Ninefang super-celestial realm is in the form of a portal, setting off the center of the more vast heavenly court like the Arch of the Stars. Next, the unspeakable grand mystery. Brother Jian, this should be the heaven of the real Wuyang. Chuanqiu looked solemn. Immediately afterwards, there was an uneasy restlessness in the bottle-yang bottle. The stopper of the bottle was gently opened, and the voice of the 3 emperors rang loudly. What happened to Xiaoyu? How do I feel something is wrong here? Why is this breath so familiar? It makes me inexplicably irritable. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly and whispered, 3 seniors, we should now enter the real court of Zhenliang. What? Xiaoyu, do you want to go straight to Zhenliang Lao? The true shadow of this emperor hasn't been restored. Chapter 47-22. Jian Wushuang is full of black lines. Looking at the magnificent posture of the heavenly court, I am afraid that he really must have the intention to straighten the real Wuyang Lao nest. I am afraid that he is also weak. Don't think about it, you misunderstood. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly, and then said the whole thing in and out, and said it roughly. In the end, there was silence in the bowl of yang bottle, and then there was a burst of uncontrollable excitement. Great, Xiaoyu, you continue to maintain relationship with that little Emperor Laozi and gain trust. When the 3 emperors recover, we will come and destroy the den of the real Wuyang Laoer directly. No, not very good. Jian Wushuang's mouth twitched. You don't have too much psychological pressure, Xiaoyu. Just act as usual, brush some sense of existence, and leave the rest to us. It really saves the time and effort of Tianda. This old Wuyang man can't think of it anyway. We are by his side. Hush, mute, we must not expose our breath next. Everything will be decided by our friends. Little friend, you take care of yourself next. Less than a last resort, of course. Do not call us out as a last resort. We are good at recuperating. Jian Wushuang still wanted to talk, and the stopper of the bottle-yang bottle was closed directly, giving no chance at all. He smiled bitterly. At this moment, Qin Qing's voice rang from outside Yulong. Brother Sword, we should get off. Jian Wushuang responded, and then took out Qiu with Chuanqiu. Stepping on this vast cloud, Qin Qing took the lead and smirked. Brother Sword, how do you feel? Looking around, Jian Wushuang nodded. It's pretty good. Along with their conversation, a statue of Zun riding a fairy crane, or a sword, or riding a chariot, gathered in front of this heavenly gate. From a broad perspective, all of them are without exception. In the vast clouds of Yu Yun, countless colorful lotus peaks and rainbows intersect each other, and the 9 vast expanse to the center of the boundless heavens span a supreme avenue paved by Yu Yun. Almost 100 figures have gathered outside the Tianmen. Under the guidance of the thin purple robe, the little emperor wearing a blood-stained dynasty dress slowly paced down the imperial court. More than 100 Yen who were also waiting here, after seeing this somewhat embarrassed little emperor, looked at each other one by one, and then they all reluctantly bowed their hands. See the little emperor. Without looking at the perfunctory Yen, Xiadaijin's footsteps moved towards Jian Wushuang slightly. Brother Jian, follow me along. Jian Wushuang nodded and looked around again, then stood behind the little emperor. There were only 6 Yen left, and 1 ancestor followed him. Even the ceremonies were gone. Looking at Shao Emperor's slightly embarrassed figure, the hundreds of Yen are all meaningful and different. The gatekeepers were guarded by dozens of Yen dressed in silver helmets. When the first 2 Yangxian's axe and fork crossed, they stepped forward and arched the hand. I have seen the little emperor. The emperor has a command. The time has not arrived. It must not. The speech was not finished yet. The brave little emperor suddenly raised his leg without warning, and directly flew the 2 Yen kicks out. Get away from me, Xiadaijin said sullenly, and then strode into the heavenly gate. No one dared to stop him. The 2 Yen who had been kicked were gray-faced, standing awkwardly. Jian Wushuang waved the axe and the scattered axe to the 2, and then paced to follow the little emperor and stepped on the supreme avenue together. And the figure waiting outside the Tianmen began to whisper. One of the elders with crane hair and eyebrows, holding a whisk, snorted, increasingly flying. In my opinion, after this banquet, the position of the little emperor should be the prince. Fujio is not afraid that the wind will flash his tongue. If you say this to the ears of the little emperor, it is estimated that the heaven will not be able to be beaten with 2 swords. One of the middle-aged men with extraordinary charm seemed not to deal with this elder with a long hair, and responded with a sneer. The elder named Fu Jie's face changed slightly. It seemed that he thought back to something, stopped talking, and closed his eyes to meditate. At this moment, another Yushur gathered in front of this heavenly gate. On top of these imperial dragons, they are marked with different fonts. Before the first 10 imperial guards, the correct flag was hunting in the wind. Immediately afterwards, a figure dressed in a plain white kimono stepped out of the imperial court. A group of Yen who stood on their own saw this, and hurriedly stepped forward and arched their hands. I have seen Gongzi. The young man dressed in a Sou dynasty dress, a rich and handsome young man, saw the imperial guard with the flag of Yen parked aside, his brows flickering slightly, and then he looked at the Yen who came to greet and smiled slightly. The Xian family, with the correction of the sun, went to heaven. Promise. A group of Yen promised with a smile on his face. As the sun stepped into the heavens, dozens of imperial dragons came together again. In front of these imperial dragons, all have their own words. Chen Thimo Hualan. Not all. Wearing a kimono and slowly getting off the car, their faces are different, and after a smile, they step into the heaven with their respective companions. Walking in this supreme avenue, Jian Wushuang felt that the diffractive force in his body was renewed and transformed at a speed that he could feel. At the same time, the voice of the supreme prestige, like Hong Zhong de Lu, resounded throughout this heaven. The heavenly court opens. All fairy families, please sit down one after another. Jian Wushuang looked up to see the front of the sample. At the front of the supreme avenue was the magnificent heaven. Since the Emperor Shao woke up, his complexion was somber, and his anger was more condensed as if it were substance. It seems that this time he went not to a banquet, but to fight. On the way here after the interception, the clothes of Jian Wushuang and others were somewhat damaged and blood-stained, and they looked full of anger. Walking forward without knowing the geometry of time, when the heavenly courtyard where the thousands of waterfalls fell appeared in front of everyone, a Hongqiao from the heavenly courtyard connected to the heaven, magnificent and magnificent. There are more than 100 people who lead the boys to come to Hongqiao with red lips and white teeth. No one would think that these boys are extremely powerful. Ami has seen Xiaodigen. At first, a little girl flew straight into Xiaodigen's arms and grinned. At this point, the hostility of the little emperor's body had converged. Little Ami, have you been lazy in spiritual practice in these years when I was away? His face was rare and he eased a lot, holding the little girl and walking slowly. The little girl tilted her head and said a little embarrassedly, Ami, it's a bit lazy. After all, the practice is very boring. You see, I have lost a lot of hair for this. Chapter 47:23. The little emperor stretched his hand and scraped the bridge of the little girl's nose, and then stretched his hand towards the thin purple robe behind him. If you eat too much sweets, you may lose your teeth. The thin purple robe murmured, and then took out a handful of colorful sugar from her arms. The little emperor took out 2 of them, one into the little girl's mouth and one into his own mouth. The little girl smirked in the arms of the little emperor with her arms folded. Ami is not afraid of losing her teeth. Don't lie to you, my companion. They all say that I will not lose my teeth. The thin purple robe didn't talk much, but distributed the candy in hand to the rest of the leading boys in turn. Containing sweets, the little girl's big flashing eyes looked at Jian Wushuang curiously. Somehow, seeing the little girl's red lips and white teeth, Jian Wushuang inexplicably remembered the naive and the old brothers in the divine universe. Little Emperor, who is this big brother? Xiao Dijuan turned around and looked at Jian Wushuang, then smiled. He is my good friend, you have to call him Brother Jian. Brother Jian. The little girl smiled sweetly at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang reported with a smile, subconsciously reached out and touched the small bun on her head. Little Emperor patted her lightly. Go play, I'm going to meet the Emperor. The little girl nodded and said, Little Emperor, don't make Emperor angry this time, he was so angry after you went back last time. The little Emperor did not speak, and reached out and carried it on the Hongqiao. After leaving the boy, his anger was quietly rising again, and his face was somber, and he was just like, 2. Set foot on Hongqiao and walk into Tianting Tianmen in 1 step. There are also more than 10 Yenxian guarding the Tianmen. The 2 leading Yenxian, who were wearing gold armor, hurriedly and consciously gave way after seeing the deity, almost throwing the axe in their hands to the ground. The little emperor stepped directly into it, and Jian Wushuang and others followed. Buzz! Flowing clouds and water ripples spread between the world. Feeling the warm and lush flowing around the body, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes. Between the entrances, countless towering mountains are entrenched here, and thousands of jade-like waterfalls are embedded in them, converging into huge rivers. And in the very center of this heavenly court, a vast expanse of sapphire giant hall is located in Yun, a round of a big day that exudes warmth and brilliance, reflecting behind it. Here, is it the heaven? Jian Wushuang looked at the magnificent momentum in front of him, and his heart moved. In front of the sapphire giant hall, a road paved by Ruinyu has been paved to Tianmen. The little emperor first stepped on the Ruinyu Avenue and walked toward the front. After sighing in his heart, Jian Wushuang and others followed. Feeling the overflowing huameng, several people did not speak again and went straight to heaven. As he was about to step into the heavenly court, the ground covered by Ruinyu was condensed into 2 robes by the flowing clouds. Have seen the little emperor. The 2 Dao almost gave birth to a figure, and said to the little emperor, Go away. Xiaodigen blurted out the words directly, using yen force to shock the 2, and stepped into the giant hall. The 2 twins had the same figure. It seemed to have been strange, and after being kind to the crowd, they reverted to drifting clouds. Walking into this sapphire giant hall and stepping into the vast square, Jian Wushuang only saw this, and hundreds of elders had already gathered at this time. Every old man is surrounded by a layer of warm and lush mansions, and it is difficult to observe its realm, but what is certain is that for every old man gathered here, realm practice is never under Qin. Looking at the little emperor who was full of anger, the more than 100 old men all greeted, I have seen the little emperor. Faced with these old men, the little emperor's face eased a little, but he just said, "Go in." After that, Bento went straight to the hall. A look of helplessness appeared on the faces of the elders. This time the banquet was afraid that it would be difficult to end. Enter the hall of this majestic view, and on the side of the throne on the other side, the little emperor sat coldly. Immediately afterwards, a group of elders waiting in the square entered the giant hall in turn. No one spoke, all hands crossed in the sleeves. The old was watching the nose and the nose. As a bit of Yen Xian entered, the atmosphere in this vast hall was slightly subtle. Surrounded by the Yen Xian, a young man dressed in white teeth and plain clothes, a rich and handsome young man, stepped into the hall. Face to face, Xiao Daijin's complexion grew more cloudy. Instead, the young man took the lead to break the silence and said with a faint smile, "The second brother, the younger brother, has seen Big Brother." Jian Wushuang looked at him with a deep gaze, and there was a playful color in his eyes. It seems that the heart is feeling that the young man in the white suit looks subconsciously at Jian Wushuang, with some scrutiny in his eyes. At this moment, the little emperor walked slowly down from the position of the head of the throne, with a glorious glory. He stepped back slowly, his face unnatural. "Say, are you sent by you?" The little emperor's voice was cold, and his eyes filled with anger. The young man corrected the corner of his mouth unconsciously. "Big brother, what are you talking about? Why can't I hear?" Before he finished talking, a powerful slap was drawn directly on the son's face, followed by another powerful kick, kicking it far away. Such a combination of skills is too fast. After a while, after the flashes of afterimages, all the immortals reacted, and the two had already flew out of the hall. "Brother Sword, let's go to watch a good show together," Chen Qing said excitedly, directly pulling Jian Wushuang to the outside of the palace. I saw that on the corridor, the little emperor straddled on the son's body, stretched out his two slaps, and swooped with bows on both sides. The son's face also swelled at a rate visible to the naked eye. "Little emperor, don't want to fight again. Emperor will come later." One of the old men with black hair and black beard had no choice but to dare to step forward. For a time, there were many voices of admonishment, but the little emperor seemed to not hear it, and he still slapped his palm and opened his bow. "Yongzi Yen, you're enough." The prince, knocked down to the ground, violently exclaimed. Just as he was about to try to resist, Qin Qing smirked and released Yen Li to firmly fix his arms. "Qin Qing, you want to be arrogant? Fight between the emperors? Why do you intervene?" Yen Xian, who was full of voice, scolded. Qin Qing glanced at him, and then disdainfully, "Lao Tzu gets involved. Do you have the ability to beat Lao Tzu? Are you arrogant, an old man with a bite? Have you practiced on the dog?" A Yen Xian, who was next to the son, snarled with anger. Qin Qing's face suddenly sighed, his eyes like a sword shot at him. Yen Xian, who wanted to scold again, immediately swallowed her throat and shrank back. Chapter 47-24. For a time, there was only the anger that the son was unwilling, and the slap of the little emperor's bow. Nearly 200 old men in the heavenly court looked at this scene and shook their heads and sighed. This is not the first time about the emperor's flying and arrogance. It was a total of 5 feasts and 3 fights. However, although the emperor was very cryptic about this, he never stopped it, and even had no crimes or lessons. This also caused the participants to dare to speak out, fearing that the little emperor would be upset and give himself a sword for nothing. With Chen Qing as an accomplice, the little emperor let go of his hands and feet and slapped his face, and the son could only bear humiliation. As for the more than 10 yen xian brought by him, although his eyes moved, he did not dare to dissuade him. At this moment, a sigh of resounding sound. "Gongxian, Mo wants to use this heaven as your 6-day realm. Is your heaven the place where you want to be?" The same figure in a plain ceremonial dress stepped into this sapphire giant hall, which was quite a martial art among the eyebrows of the martial arts. The little emperor raised his head slowly when he heard the words, and looked at him with yawning eyes, and then let go of the young man under him, and walked slowly towards him. "What are you going to do?" The rather heroic young man stepped back half a step unconsciously, his eyes showing vigilance. It was a powerful slap in response to him. The Ingwu young man seemed to have expected that his neck would escape the blow a little, but then there was a sudden pain in his abdomen. I saw that Shao Emperor, with an incredible speed, directly hit the top of his knee and hit his lower abdomen, forcing him to lose his resistance instantly, and at the same time the slap of the storm threw up. The young man stood up, covered his slightly bluish cheeks, looked angrily at the little emperor who was still violent, and then raised the palm of his raging rage. Second son, you have already done many secret attacks. This time, let's pause. Chen Qing sounded with a little sneer, and at the same time, a more prudent force was blocked in front of the sun. The sun corrected his gaze, and looked at Chen Qing's gaze with a sudden death. Chen Qing, what do you mean? It's not interesting, people are doing it, the sky is watching, oh, I almost forgot, you two are already heaven. Chen Qing said with his arms behind his head. The killing in his eyes became heavier and heavier, but the prince just snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves, and retreated to the side, closing his eyes and raising his mind. Brother Jian. Chen Qing immediately leaned against Jian Wushuang, his face mysteriously said, guess who is Emperor Shao? Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, is it his brother again? Chen Qing nodded, the third brother, Gongziyu. He smiled dumbly, would he want to draw several brothers one by one? I'm not sure, Chen Qing shrugged. But it is estimated that when the fourth is drawn, the emperor is coming. This brave young man named Gongziyu, with a slap in the face of the little emperor's storm, snarled hard with dozens of slaps and slammed into his face with his vigorous palm. But the space seemed to stagnate for a moment, and the little emperor slightly passed his head slightly, and then stepped back, and kicked the sun off with a kick. There was an uproar, and the companion brought by Gongziyu could not help but take a step forward and whispered, you are a prince, why are you the second son, and the three sons are embarrassed in this heavenly court? Are you arrogant? Little Emperor glanced at him coldly, and in his hand quietly appeared a real sword with immortal air. Seeing that, the companion wearing a purple robe stepped back and gritted his teeth, saying, heaven cannot be stained with blood. At this moment, there were 4 other bodies dressed in tooth-white suits, all walking into the Sapphire Giant Hall. But after seeing this scene, the 4 figures took a half step back in tacit understanding and looked at the little emperor alertly. Come here. Little Emperor withdrew the real sword and waved at several people. One of the slightly younger people responded quietly, brother, don't come unharmed. The atmosphere was heavy, and all Yenxian stared at this impending battle square. The little emperor sneered, and a soft sword was wiped from his waist without traces on his palms. The face of the 5 people changed slightly, and one of the thin young men stepped forward. Brother, stop, don't make the emperor unhappy anymore. He turned a deaf ear and raised his sword step by step, revealing his murderous intentions from his eyes. At this time, Qin Qing's complexion also changed subtly. Brother Sword, Shao Dijuan seems to have really killed himself this time, so I will step forward and stop. Jian Wushuang nodded, this magnificent heavenly court, if it was really stained with blood, I am afraid that the emperor who has not yet appeared will never forgive the little emperor. The young man covering his cheek aside with a happy face, the look in his eyes, I wish they could fight on the spot. A total of 5 magnificent powers filled the square in this Sapphire Giant Hall for a moment. Every son in a kimono is ready for a battle. The little emperor didn't seem to worry at all. He carried the soft sword in his hand and moved forward as if he had entered the unmanned state. Just as Jian Wushuang and Qin Qing were about to step forward to stop, the sky that was originally lingering in the clouds, I do not know when there will be a brilliant Chinese rhyme. At this moment, the entire cloud-filled sky dome changed. Jian Wushuang seemed to realize what he was looking at. I saw a black robe formed by a gathering and scattered cloud. He stepped on the colorful rhythm and walked down the sky, shockingly, as if there were rules of the avenue flowing around him. Is this the true Wuyang Emperor? Jian Wushuang murmured in his heart, somewhat shocked by his general trend. With a palm of your hand, the battle between the little emperor and others was directly suppressed, and the strength was dissipated. Even Jian Wushuang clearly felt that the strength of the body was suppressed. The black robe has its foot in the center of the square. It looks like a sculpture. The faces of the 5 people all changed, and then they shook hands at the same time. Have seen you, Bo. Little Emperor did not speak, reached out and placed the soft sword around his waist, then said quietly, "You, Bo." The black robe fluttered slightly, a pair of turbid eyes slowly swept around, and finally looked at him. "Little Emperor, don't be angry anymore. The Emperor will arrive later." As the voice fell, it was another voice that seemed to permeate through the ages, carrying the supreme majesty, resounding, "Are you kissing?" All Yen Xian who gathered in the heavenly court heard this voice, and they all sang their hands and said, "I have seen the Emperor." The heavenly dome with dim colorful colors dimmed sideways, and a majestic figure dressed in the costume of the Emperor of the mountain and river emerged. Behind him, there are 99 figures. Chapter 47:25. Every body shape is full of magnificence, and the light wheels of different colors condensed by Yen Li shine on the entire heaven. It made the majestic figure in the emperor's clothes look a little sad. But any Yen Xian who can come to this heavenly court is by no means so stupid. The dignified figure capable of ascending to the throne and destroying dozens of emperors by his own power is hundreds of millions of times more terrifying than he revealed. Looking at the mighty emperor who stepped on the sky, Jian Wushuang finally saw the true face. For a time, in the vast square of this giant palace, the atmosphere was extremely tense. The question with anger is obviously from the emperor's mouth. The little emperor looked up at the Emperor Wei standing at the top of the cloud, and said quietly, "Go back to the emperor, and the sun will not dare." "Then what were you doing just now? Do you want to stain the heavens?" Another question was issued with a question. Immediately afterwards, the Emperor Zhenluyang came to Haohan Square with endless momentum. "They are all your siblings. As a prince, not only did you not lead by example, but you have lost your identity again and again. Why should I dare not deal with you?" Little Emperor did not say a word, and there was no fear in his lowered eyelids. At that moment, the figure of Yu Boss Black Robe slowly came to Emperor Zhenwu Yang and whispered, "Emperor and Little Emperor have not made a big mistake. It is not unforgivable. After the banquet, dispose again." The body of Wei glanced at the Little Emperor, and then to Yu Bo. There was helpless flashes in his eyes. "Well, let's have a feast first." At the end of the speech, he took the lead into the main hall, and then followed 99 old men carrying all kinds of huameng, followed with a smile. "Good." Hundreds of Yen Xian promised in unison. The sun stared at Qin Qing and others fiercely, and then strode into the main hall. This farce finally ended with the presence of Emperor Zhenluyang. Xiaodaijin gave them a deep look, and then came to Jian Wushuang and others. He seemed tired, grinning reluctantly. "Come on, the feast is about to begin." "Little Emperor, did you hurt anything?" Qin Qing was worried. He shook his head, then stepped into the hall under the guidance of a thin purple robe. Inside the main hall, the Emperor Zhenluyang sat on the throne. On his side, the gloomy Little Emperor sat on the side of the head. Yu Bo is like a black sculpture, standing behind the emperor. In the vast hall, the elders who carried the wheels of various colors sat side by side and sat down on the sides. Slightly down the first position is the sons in white kimonos. Under the instruction of Xiaodaijin, Jian Wushuang and the others sat down with the 6 sons, but they were clearly distinguished. Sitting in the misty clouds, Jian Wushuang looked at his nose with his eyes and his nose, but he didn't care about the scrutiny cast by the boys on the opposite side. Immediately afterwards, Chuanqiu, who was sitting next to him, lowered his voice and said, "Brother Jian, I really didn't expect that one day I could come to the heaven of Zhenluyang. Don't do anything stupid." Jian Wushuang looked at him and smiled slightly. Chuanqiu nodded. "Relax, I know how important it is." In the low-pitched conversation from time to time, a fairy came from the cloud and presented a plate of precious fruits. Zhen Weiyang sat on the throne, looked at this heavenly court with a smile, and then gave a more exaggerated emotion. From this emotion, Jian Wushuang also knew about this heavenly feast, and it has only been 5 times since its first opening. Held every other Chinese New Year. Jian Wushuang doesn't know exactly how long this year will be. According to preliminary estimates, it is likely that the time of the 10 galaxies will be broken. Time has long been the most meaningless thing here. After the achievement of Yenxian, Shouyuan is endless, except for the destruction of external forces. Even the so-called Mingming Heavenly Tao may have little effect on Yenxian. After all, the creation of the avenue of heaven and earth, the ultimate order, is likely to come from the hand of a certain fairy. Those old men who have carried various rounds of light and have reached a level so high that even Chen Qing feels dazed, is to help Zhen Wuang to open up the heavens. The first veteran who boarded the emperor won the trust of Zhen Wuang, even if it is the seat of the six sons, not as good as them. It is an honor to be able to enter the heavenly court for the banquet, so even a humble immortal at the moment is in the heaven domain controlled by Zhen Wuang and belongs to the existence of the top. As the table in front of him was gradually filled with precious fruits, a beautiful fairy was also overwhelming. Chen Qing, who was sitting on the side of Jian Wushuang, had a pair of bright eyes attached to the fairy from beginning to end without leaving. Wang Xianzi, it's me. I don't remember me? I'm Chen Qing, who controls Jingchuan. Last time we were still talking in the Fengtai. Looking at the fairy who was leaning over and pouring wine, Chen Qing's eyes widened and talked. The fairy pouted, I don't remember. It doesn't matter if you remember, when the banquet is over, I'm still listening to the wind tower. How are you? Chen Qing grinned. The fairy smiled and returned without the answer, holding the jade pot. There is a play. Chen Qing whispered, excited. Hearing the whole course of Jian Wushuang, he smiled slightly, picked up the glass of wine, and tasted it in a sip. As these fairies retreated, nearly 30 fairies came to the cloud, dancing in the center of the temple, and the sleeves transformed into a beautiful water sleeve. Brother Sword, I think your age should be small, but there is a sweetheart. If not, brother, let me match you up. Chen Qing leaned up with a glass of wine and smiled faintly. Farewell, you still have to worry about your own problems first. I already have a person in my heart, and I will never forget it. Jian Wushuang replied, his voice firm. Chen Qing heard the words and nodded his head. The sword brother's heart is firm. No wonder that such a mindset can reach Lin Yenxian. No answer, looking at the fairy with long sleeves and good dancing in front of him, and the slightly noisy sound around him, Jian Wushuang actually sat down. Chen Qing couldn't help crying and laughing. After Jian Wushuang and He Chuanxiu had a drink, he began to appreciate the dancing posture. Zhen Wuang was sitting on the emperor's seat, and looked at the little emperor sitting next to him from time to time. He seemed to want to say something to ease some atmosphere, but the little emperor seemed to feel nothing at all, just drinking one glass after another. In the end, Zhen Wuang couldn't hold back, leaning forward and whispering, Yenner, how have you been all these years? Back to the emperor, it was not bad. The little emperor said calmly, and then he disappeared. 6 days there is too far away. After this banquet, you come to live with me. Zhen Wuang asked him again. Chapter 47-26. Little Emperor's mouth twitched with a chuckle. It's goodbye. I'm in the 6-day realm, and some Yenxian would be tempted to die earlier. If I follow him next to the emperor, I'm afraid it's even more uneven. Zhen Wuang heard the words, frowned, and then glanced into the palace with eyes full of oppressive authority, and finally stopped intentionally or unintentionally in front of the next 6 sons. Yenner, can there be evidence? Evidence? It's almost dead. Little Emperor said, holding a jade pot and drinking directly at the spout. Looking at the little emperor sitting so frivolously in the side capital, a glimmer of haze flashed in the eyes of Prince Gong, but then he covered up again. He couldn't understand that, except for Gongzi Yen, the other 6 sons are more suitable for being a prince, but why did the emperor choose such a waste that could not be practiced as a prince? A lot of supreme resources he piled up from a waist to Yen Xian, every drop of blood in his son's Yen meridian, almost all are the most top-level resources in heaven. Since the emperor did not want to do it, he would do it on his behalf and die a waste, which is far more than 10,000 times better than the entire Big Siu accompanied him to decline. At that time, even the emperor will consider him. A fierce sneer was unconsciously hung on the face, but the eyes cast by the little emperor struck him in the face. The son was stunned, and he quickly put away his expression and used drinking as a demonstration. The little emperor withdrew his disdainful gaze, and then unconsciously looked at the only guy who was somewhat maverick. In this heavenly immortal, fairy dance, this guy actually dived down to close his eyes and sit down, really a unique one. It's such a strange guy, don't you have any fun at all? Thinking of this, the little emperor squeezed a bit of diffusive force, and shot it on Qin Qing's body. Chen Qingxin understood that when he touched the sword Wushuang with his elbow. "Brother sword, wake up quickly, Chen please invite you to see something good." Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and looked helplessly at Qin Qing. Chen Qing smiled in a low voice, then opened his mouth to the fairy who was close at hand, and exhaled. Yanli turned into a strange wind, rising from the ground without any signs, actually blowing up the skirts of those fairies. For a time, the beautiful scenery lit up. What? The screams rang out from the mouths of the fairies, and they were already in a mess, each hurriedly covering their skirts blown up by the strange wind. Seeing this situation, Jian Wushuang was speechless, and then shook his head. "Brother Qin, it's better to make less jokes." Qin Qing scratched his head and didn't wait to speak again. Then the young master who had noticed it suddenly slammed the case and angered, "Qin Qing, you are arrogant." There was silence in the heavenly court. After finishing this sentence, the son immediately confronted the emperor Zhenwuyang and said, "Return to the emperor, Qin Qing blatantly wrecked the heavenly court and has no way to look. Punish." "It's not me, I don't have it. Everyone didn't see the demon wind from where, why did you think it was me? It was clearly framed." Qin Qing got up and said angrily. Zhenwuyang shook his head helplessly, then waved his hand. "Qin Qing, get out. Without my summoning, you will not be allowed to go back to heaven again. Promise." Qin Qing was frustrated and promised, but when he turned around, he raised his eyebrows and glanced at young master. After this episode, the fairies who were forced to reveal the spring under their skirts jumped off again, all ran out of heaven. For a time, the first half of the banquet was over. Next, it was Zhenwuyang's extremely exaggerated emotion. Since he could not sit down again, Jian Wushuang simply took a closer look at each of the Yanxian powers present. The elders with all kinds of light wheels, that is, the veterans who had fought with the Emperor Zhenwuyang, were the first echelon. They had an almost profound extreme strength and a state that could not see the real, even Qin Qing had out of reach. Jian Wushuang can vaguely guess that they may have taken that step completely and reached another unknown and mysterious state. As for the second echelon, a group of Yanxian who are headed by Qin Qing are the peak of Yanxian, but they have never been able to break through. The sword Wushuang is in the middle of the second and third echelons. After all, ordinary Yanxian, even 4 or 5 Yanxian, can't effectively kill him. Even with Qin Qing, Jian Wushuang has the confidence to withdraw even if he loses. What will it be above the peak of Yanxian? Lord Zun, how could he exist? And what role does the master play? No one can give him the answer, everything can only be approached step by step. As the Emperor Zhenwuyang's emotions came to an end, a message came into each Yanxian's ear with Yanli. "Driving the peach?" Jian Wushuang murmured softly, and then looked at Zhenwuyang Emperor somewhat puzzled. A jadeite fairy peach enveloped by thousands of Chinese rhymes appeared in the Emperor's hands. "You are still the same as before. This peach contains a great opportunity, which is the most indispensable part of breaking through Yanxian. If you win it, it will be of great benefit." At the moment, all Yanxian's faces showed an unstoppable joy. The most pinnacle of the feast, Duo Tao, finally began. Those who are able to participate in this feast are not only the most powerful Yanxian strongmen in this heaven, but ordinary treasures are already as difficult as their state of mind. Only by breaking through that arrogant state can they be attracted. This peach contains a great opportunity to break through. Once obtained, it is basically a foot out of the realm of immortality. But there is only one Xian Tao, and the participants have more than 300 Yanxian, and the competition will be extremely fierce. And there is a high probability that these Yanxian who are the runners are still eager to try. After all, even if they fail, the emperor will also give a very generous reward. The popular peach has always been the 6 sons of the Emperor Zhenwuyang, and only the son of Zhengwu won 2 fairy peach. This time he also had a winning ticket. As for the little emperor, he has never participated in the battle to win the peach. Xian Tao landed on the ground, limited to 1 year, and found and held 10 days, the ultimate winner. Zhen Wuyang said the rules, between the palms overturned, the fruit of the rhythm of the Didao road through the Tianting Palace, fall into the entire heaven and earth. Gentlemen, please start. Emperor Zhenwuyang said with a smile. Due to the rules, all Yanxian except the elders can participate, but the 6 sons can only bring 1 Yanxian into the market at most. The younger son took the lead to ask for help. Behind him stood a white-robed Yanxian, who took care of his companion since childhood. As the son asked for his life, Gong Ziyu, Gong Ziqian and others also participated in the battle to win the peach. Chapter 47-27. The 6 sons were all dispatched. Although each of them had a warm smile on their faces, they were already undercurrent. This is the best time to perform, directly related to their status in the hearts of the Emperor Zhenwuyang and the elders. In these several battles to win the peach, the prince has already become the existence of arrogant people, even those elders have already favored it, and it has the meaning of substituting for the little emperor. Therefore, every son-in-law has made great efforts to bring his realm to the top. After all, he can only get more attention when he comes to the end. Just as all Yanxian was ready to go to heaven, a lightly written voice sounded in the heavenly court. Emperor, I will participate in this battle for the peach. Zhen Wuyang wrapped all Yanxian in this heavenly court for a moment, and then all looked at him. The little emperor slowly got up and swept the Yanxian. Yener, are you sure? Zhen Wuyang also got up, a little happy in his eyes. I've never participated in it all the time, so that some people have ignored the existence. This time, I just want them to distinguish between the primary and the secondary. The little emperor's voice was low and prestigious, and he looked at the next one without scruples. Zhong Yanxian. The 6 sons looked at each other in unison, and their faces were completely different. The son did not speak, but the palms in his sleeves were tightly held together. Well, Yener, I haven't seen your cultivation behavior for a long time. I can take advantage of this opportunity today. Zhen Wuyang smiled and waved his sleeve at the same time. Come here, inform Chen Qing to. I rolled in and asked him to accompany Yener. No, Emperor, I don't need Chen Qing this time, Xiao Dijuan said here, looking at Jian Wushuang. His eyes met, he said, Brother Jian, can you follow me? All Yanxian's eyes converged on Jian Wushuang's body again. Zhen Wuyang also looked at Jian Wushuang, the emperor's consciousness beyond his imagination, and he could easily see everything he wanted to know. Soon he was a little puzzled. This kid who was just a fairyland in addition to his amazing talents, seemed to have a unique physique, even he couldn't see through it. At the same time, he has a feeling that he can't tell why. Although this young man's fairyland is not very deep, it seems inexplicably extremely comfortable, as if there is a certain level of association. Taking back the emperor's consciousness, Zhen Wuyang nodded. Go on, Yener. For this grand dude, who always dislikes the mountains and dews, and is silent, once the matter is determined, even the emperor is difficult to change. Suddenly, Xiaodigen came to Jian Wushuang and said slightly, Let's go, it seems they shouldn't be able to wait. Jian Wushuang didn't hesitate too much. After nodding, he got up and walked outside the heavenly court. The thin purple robe suddenly grabbed Jian Wushuang's arm, and a pair of muddy eyes seemed to want to explain something, and finally only whispered, Little Emperor has given it to you. Xiaodigen stepped forward and patted the shoulder of thin purple robe, then walked out of heaven with Jian Wushuang. Luyun Shuan, Yanli Vast. Standing outside the court of heaven, all Yanxian scattered down like a panic, and the 6 sons also brought their own companions and fell to heaven. The battle for the peach that involved more than 300 Yanxian in total began. The Emperor Zhenwuyang, who was sitting in the heavenly court, waved his hand, and the misty scroll made by Yanli was reflected in the hall. The scene in this picture is Huang Heavenly Realm. You guys, guess who will win the peach this time? Who will it be? Zhen Weiyang asked. It's the second son. A long-bearded old man, Fu Su, smiled. Another old man in black robe refuted, the 4 sons are not weak. The 3 sons are the last candidates who can win Xian Tao. If the old man is right, he already has a preliminary understanding of the fairy style. Hundreds of elders in the heavenly courts expressed their opinions, but in general, they pointed the candidates to the second son, the third son, and the 4 sons. Zhen Weiyang seems to have other answers. Looking down at the sculpture like Yu Bodeo, Yu Cheng, what do you think? Uncle Yu raised his head, and his murky, deep eyes seemed to pass through the flowing clouds, looking towards the heaven. The little guy next to Xiaodigen is extraordinary. So you also think he will win this fairy peach? The little emperor is calm and will not do things that are not sure. Once he shoots, everything will be a foregone conclusion. After listening to Yu Ba's words, Zhen Weiyang no longer spoke. With the elders, he carefully watched the picture together. Between the vast clouds, the 2 black-shirt rangers dressed in figures sat in the clouds, seemingly not in a hurry to compete for Xian Tao, but they seemed to be traveling. This heaven, which carries the entire heaven, is completely composed of the giant water of Gaochuan, which is quite mysterious and vast. You said, how much assurance can we get to the end? On the empty flowing cloud, Xiaodi Junxing feared that Jian Wushuang could not hear it and shouted. Jian Wushuang heard and said, I don't know, I try my best. So what if my brothers come over again? It's not easy, kill it back, but I think in this heavenly court, they should also be able to converge a little bit, at most it's just a little action. No matter what, I will win Xian Tao this time. There must be no mistake. So confident? I can feel that your siblings are very resentful to you. Maybe they will come together next time. Why afraid? Xiao Dijuan asked with raised eyebrows. Of course I'm afraid that I'm drawn in for no reason, but I want to live for a few more years. Jian Wushuang lay back in the clouds and laid back. Little Emperor pouted, which can become Yen Xian, which one does not regard Shuyuan as nothing? You old monster who doesn't know how many years have lived, are you so attached to longevity? Jian Wushuang felt very helpless. It has not been 10 million years since he entered the path of spiritual practice. Now he is actually called an old monster, and he adds some old-fashionedness. Moreover, he couldn't explain it, he was involved too much, and it was extremely likely to cause unnecessary troubles because of the missed words. I am afraid that the Yenxian in Daanhuan, can hardly imagine a Yenxian who is only a few million years old. After arrogantly passing by, under the tug of the little emperor, the 2 fell into heaven. In the huge roaring water, the 2 figures drove the waves forward. Yen Xian, who participated in the battle for the peach, passed by, glancing at them and hurried away. Until the last moment of fighting for Xian Tao, every Yenxian was unwilling to confront the son of the Emperor Zhenwing. Chapter 47-28. After all, with the exception of the little emperor whose strength was not announced, the remaining 6 sons all had the terrifying fighting power of tying the 3 Yenxian with one battle. In addition, each son can also carry an old companion with a deep realm, and can basically erase directly when facing the individual Yenxian. Of course, erasure is not a direct kill, but a teleportation. In this battle for Peach, basically, only the sons are fighting for it. Rao is so, the Yenxian who can attend the feast of the heavenly court are still rushing towards this. Although Xian Tao is impossible to obtain, there are countless great chances in the heaven of this heaven. If you can get even a hint of fairy feeling somewhere, it will be a big transformation. Therefore, apart from a few sons, most of those who participated in the peach robbing rushed to the supremacy. The giant rivers and rivers, standing forever, with grass and mayflies, accumulate in the sun and the moon. Every grass, tree, mountain, and water in this heaven has already had aura of vitality, and shuttled among them, the sublimation of the body is sublimating at a subtle speed. At the same time, there are also fairy spirits built by the way of heaven, which are very unfriendly to these interrupters. Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan were very unlucky. When performing a reed crossing the river in a giant water, the unknown underwater fairy set off a huge wave and directly lifted the two into the water. Fortunately, the fairy at the bottom of the water is not malicious, but after a little bit of play, it disappears. Damn, it's really unpredictable. Jian Wushuang, who was embarrassed to the shore, fell back on the shore. After the last big voyage, he had some resistance to the water, fearing that he would meet the giant sea sky chapter again in the water, that kind of unknown and scary creature. Little Emperor's performance was not much better than Jian Wushuang's, and he was slightly gasping and helpless. Since the waterway is not easy to go, let's take the mountain road next. It seems that 1 year is enough, but in this vast sky, it is not enough. Jian Wushuang analyzed, and at the same time looked at the Shiyue Zongling. The little emperor nodded. According to you. However, just as the two were preparing for the route, a fairy resembling a giant ape, but with a dragon head, quietly protruded a huge head from the green forest in front of it. The turbid breath from the black hole-like nostrils is much stronger than the hurricane. Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan glanced at each other, and both saw a bitterness in the other's eyes. Boom! A palm defeated a Yenxian figure, and at this moment, the sun's eyebrows were full of gloom. Behind him, I do not know when dozens of Yenxian gathered. After a moment, the sun corrected his voice in a low voice. You check in batches one by one, try to avoid the big conflict with the Yenxian next to the sun, but try not to cause a big conflict. The dozens of Yenxian promised at the same time, and then scattered across the sky in a flash. Ma'am, do you think that the one who won the Xiantao this time will be the son of Yanzi? A strange smile appeared on Bai Pao Yangxian's face. The second son laughed. Do you think that there is no strength at all, or can the sick emperor have a climate? The son corrected his eyebrows and twisted it into a Chuan character, and said in a deep voice, My partner, pay attention to your words and deeds. You have a sick tuberculosis. You rot me into the stomach, otherwise it will be passed into my emperor's ear. I must also be implicated. Follow the second son. Bai Pao Yenxian bowed his head to admit that he was wrong. This, on the other hand, is by no means your opponent. Young Master Zhang didn't open his mouth, his brows spread slowly. Yeah, if it's not the emperor's protection, this shameful guy should die before he is born. The real blood and luck of the emperor, no matter from the level of life or the perception of the road, are far beyond the top level of the same realm, and even this advantage has become more apparent after entering the realm of Yenxian. But there is a special case among their 7 sons. This special case is the son of Yen. As the eldest son of an emperor, his physique has been declining to the extreme since he was born, almost died, and accompanied by various tuberculosis, it is impossible to practice at all. This is a shame. As the bloodline of the emperor who controlled the avenue and waved to create the heavenly court, he would actually suffer from such an incredible illness. He couldn't figure it out. How could the Emperor Beizhuang have a bloodline suffering from tuberculosis? Even any blind treasure in the heaven realm could not be healed, as if it were some kind of curse, accompanying him until his death. The little emperor suffering from tuberculosis has also become a forbidden emperor's Zhenliang. No one knows except their 6 sons and their companions. How can a guy who vomits blood violently after strenuous exercise deserve to fight him? There was a sense of pleasure in the eyes of Gongzi Deng, and he secretly said, Since I haven't stopped you from coming to heaven, then this time, in the face of the emperor and their face, you will step on your soles. What is the location of Xiantao now? Return to the second son. There is a special fluctuation in the direction of Jiaozhou, and the 4 sons and the 5 sons are likely to be there. Go to Jiaozhou, and at the same time release the news, let Yen Xian along the way, try to get rid of Gongzi Yen. Expensive! A loud roar rang through the wild forest, and the ancient giant tree began to collapse. I saw a huge to the extreme strange ape running in this green forest. The sturdy body easily broke the giant tree in front of them. If you look closely, on the back of this strange ape's vast silver hair, the 2 dressed rangers appear to be lying on their backs contentedly. Jian Wushuang beat a full hiccup, and then gave a thumbs up to the little emperor. Just now a big hill-like fish entered the strange belly of both of them. What Jian Wushuang didn't think of was that this man who was a prince and had a gloomy face all day long, like someone who owed him 800 yuan, was actually a good fish roast. Just a piece of rock salt, a pile of towering green forest, it simply roasted the beautiful grilled fish. For food, Jian Wushuang has long gone. The reason for the roasted fish is purely when fighting with the apes under the seat. A fish immortal with a wise mind floats up from the bottom of the water, and coincidentally, the sword is a double-inch sword Mang, sent it to the west heavens impartially. Adhering to the principle of not wasting, Jian Wushuang reluctantly took it out of the water and prepared to sacrifice to the Five Organs Temple. The little emperor took over and baked a delicious grilled fish. Eating my grilled fish will help me win Xiantao. Xiao Dijuan raised his eyebrows to look at Jian Wushuang with a satisfied face. Chapter 47-29. Jian Wushuang was helpless and patted the broad back of his body. Can I say no? Most of this has entered this guy's stomach. No, you can't eat less than this guy, and you should work hard when you win the peach. Xiao Dijuan looked serious. Cannibalism is short. Jian Wushuang said leisurely, agree. Then two people and one beast continue to walk leisurely in the sky. At this moment, among the heavenly courts, all the veterans who were originally watching the pictures of the heavenly realm were all weird, and even the real Wuyang on the throne was twitching the corner of his mouth. Originally an extremely tense battle for the peach, when the picture changed, when he arrived at the two of them, it turned into a survival path for food exploration. Heavenly Emperor's heavenly tree, so I was given this boy's order. There is some blood in Zhen Wuyang's heart, and all the sky trees are all the top raw materials for the creation of heaven, and there is no heaven without the Emperor's luck, and they can't grow at all. And the sky trees growing in the heavenly realm can be regarded as a fish roasted by the little emperor, and burned cleanly with a fire. However, when he saw that Xiao Dijuan's face was no longer sullen, Zhenwuyang Emperor suppressed the complaint and began to look at this vacation-like leisurely duo with great interest. Little Emperor, is this a broken pot? In the heavenly court, an elder could not help but whisper. I'm not sure, I look like the little emperor, it seems that I don't intend to compete for Xiantao. In the opinion of the old man, it is a wise move for the little emperor to show his demeanor as a brother, and let his brother be modest. If you talk more, you will be punished in this seat to go to heaven realm to take care of Tian Chumu. Heaven is still. Sitting on the back of the strange ape, Jian Wushuang looked at the chain iron plate on the neck of the strange ape, looking a little weird. What is your chain iron plate? Even Yenxian can be imprisoned? The little emperor nodded. Yes, unless all steps can be taken in full, otherwise all Yenxian can't escape my control. Jian Wushuang heard the words and felt awkward for a while, thinking that if it was not the reason for the imprisoned chain, how could he possibly be a prisoner for several days? Seemingly seeing where his heart was, the little emperor said again, this is a treasure in my emperor's hand, named Tian Suo. When I took over the sixth heaven realm, the emperor paid me, and at the beginning it's not me who traps you, it's the little ones who do open their eyes. Jian Wushuang didn't pay much attention to the original things. After all, he only became a prisoner in less than a day, and he directly wiped out a Yenxian, and did not suffer a big loss. It just made him a little curious as to where he was caught. Before the sword Wushuang opened his mouth to prepare for an inquiry, an indescribable life and death crisis burst out of his consciousness. He didn't want to think about it, he released his strength directly, and slapped the giant ape's big head. Strange ape heart grasps the understanding, the huge body suddenly a face break, and then lie prone on the ground. A total of more than 10 magnificent and powerful forces swept from all directions, almost wiped the heads of Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan. The gigantic giant forest cut off a large area, and the power of terror exploded. Standing in the air, Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan looked cold. If I hit the head just now, I am afraid that I will be seriously injured on the spot. Immediately afterwards, 11 powerful Yenxian figures appeared, all looking at him strangely. A group of miscellaneous things, dare to injure this seat in this heaven? Xiao Dijuan looked clouded, and his eyes were as thick as water. If he was not just Jian Wushuang, he would be hit hard even if he was not out of the game. As the first Yenxian, it was the support knot that put the Ju Ci outside the Tianmen at the time. At this moment he held a floating dust and a pair of immortals made the pie. He didn't care about Xiaodigen's insults, but instead smiled. How much Xiaodigen offends is really a last resort. I hope that Xiaodigen can voluntarily withdraw and save the next big move. The little emperor looked awkwardly. Is the sun sending you? Fujie didn't open his mouth, but flicked the dust and said softly, please quit this little emperor to avoid the next big move. Miscellaneous things, find death. He shouted in rage, facing the 11 Yenxian instead of flinching, he directly confronted. A slender soft sword stirred the wind and the clouds, carrying the supreme power cover to press against the knot. Fujie's eyes flashed inconceivably, and then he smiled coldly, dusting the sky with his hands. You guys, do it. The dust blows up to 1,000,000 feet in the wind, and there is a lingering posture, carrying away. At the same time, the other 10 Yenxian also left, and all the magnificent Yenxian bombarded the little emperor. Strive to get it out of the battle. But at the next moment, a blade of sharp sword was caught in the wind, like a torn scarf, and suddenly cut forward. The dust that was about to cover up the sky was directly cut into 2 pieces under this quietly rising sword. And the little emperor also broke from there, stab a sword straight. Life and death terrors surged into my heart, and the knot was almost a subconscious head, only to escape the unmatched sword. A drop of Yin Hongxian blood rolled off the slender cut between the necks and soaked the shoulder robe. Fujie recovered from the shock and looked at Xiaodigen's eyes full of hatred. Don't keep your hands, attack with all your strength. He shouted, and immediately manipulated the dust that had been cut off an inch in his hand, and ran away. The little emperor stood in its place without any fear, and a dark field centered on him, spreading quietly like vines to the surroundings. And the support not blinded by hatred, wherever he noticed the subtle changes in the air around him, he had to hit him with 5 fingers. But the surrounding air seemed to be muddy, and he felt that the release of the force in his body was slow. With the same feeling, there are other Yenxian. The time seems to be extended for a long time, but Fujie only feels that he has been gliding in the air for a long time but has not yet landed. The emperor's incomprehensible face gradually enlarged, and at the same time a figure with a broken sword slowly emerged, and the cold eyes were almost the same. No, why are there 2 little emperors? What responded to him was a sword that was almost terrifying. A colorful sword, each sword reflects colorful huamang in the air, xian he honging one after another, carrying infinite killing intention, all cut to the support knot. The Yenxian body burst open in an instant. Only the prosperity of a sword breaks the body of the immortal. Fujie fairy body shattered and turned into powder, and at the same time a fairy pill-sized fairy source escaped from it and fled in a panic. The little emperor gripped it from a distance, and the surrounding space rose like a big invisible hand, and directly took that fairy source back into his hand. Chapter 4730. As if the heart was beating vigorously, Fuji's terrified voice resounded from the fairy source. Little Emperor, it's all my fault, it's all my fault, I will never target you anymore. Let me go, I will voluntarily quit. The little emperor looked calm. Tell me, who asked you to kill me? Fujie Xianyuan seemed to be struggling for a while, and finally struggled. Yes, it is the second son. After hearing this answer, he was not surprised. There wasn't even a slight wave in his eyes. Little Emperor, this is in heaven, you can't. Before even saying a word, the little emperor directly crushed his fairy source. In the heavenly realm, behead a Yenxian. Yenxian, who was seeing this scene all around, was shocked. They did not expect that Xiaodigen would dare to kill him. This is one of the ceremonies that the emperor once set up in the heaven realm that has heavenly court. One of them is that heavenly court cannot be stained with blood. But right now, the little emperor actually wiped out a Yenxian in this heaven. They all took a step back and panicked in their eyes. Once something starts, it is doomed to look back. When the sword with the broken sword was unparalleled and the unscrupulous sword chopped off Yanxian, the remaining 9 Yanxian, the only remaining fighting intention in the heart, were replaced by fear. Then, all fled without flesh. But how can they easily leave? Adhering to the concept of cutting grass and eradicating roots, Jian Wushuang directly released the sword spirit of Xinghe Lake and the sea, a majestic star style, cut down. The most common one is straight, but it seems to have swept the millions of miles around the space, and with the general trend of stars, the every inch of space pointed by Jian Feng is suppressed. At the same time, countless sword-shaped condensed Tongshenmangs rose from the ground and swept up. This is an explosive sword. Even if Yanxian is under this style, he can only drink hatred. 3 Yanxian were unable to dodge, and were devoured and destroyed on the spot, and no trace of the fairy source remained. The little emperor also moves forward, like a ghost. Every time he strikes, he directly wipes out a source of immortal fairy. In this moment, 6 Yanxian have been destroyed. Their speed was so fast that the emperor sitting in the heavenly court and the elders were too late to shoot, and there were only 2 Yanxian left in the encirclement. Finally, when Jian Wushuang's blade was about to be cut, the 2 Yanxian under that blade quietly disappeared. Buzz! The space was rippling, and the 2 almost immortal Yanxian fell straight into the heavenly palace. Jian Wushuang couldn't hold back, and the Tai Luo Excalibur in his hand almost flew himself out. The little emperor raised his head, and Sun Lung looked at the location of the heavenly court. Yongzi Yan, do you know that you have violated the law? A voice with irrepressible anger resounded in the heavens, the voice of the Emperor Zhenwuyang. Yongzi Yan doesn't know which sky rule was violated, please also express. Xiao Dijun was not afraid, coldly said. Heaven cannot be stained with blood, but you are in Tianting, and you can kill Yanxian directly, and you still refuse to confess your sins? The little emperor heard the words and smiled coldly. It's good for me to kill Yanxian, but it's not the heaven, but the heaven. Where do I start breaking the rules? Heaven was dead, and at the end, a suffocating anger came from the direction of heaven, and everything was calm again. Fuck things. A palm shot towards the front of the case. The lips of Zhenwuyang Emperor's lips trembled slightly. All the elders didn't say a word. The scene in the world just now was all taken into view. The 2's expressions are too shocking. Especially the young man with the broken sword, in the area of Yanxian, easily kills Yanxian in the same realm, and it seems that it is not laborious. Even from their eyes, it is incredible. The emperor breathes his anger, and the little emperor will converge in the next trip. Yubo whispered consolation. Emperor Zhenwuyang closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. At this time, the 2 Yanxian who were rescued were all kneeling on the ground, terrified. Thank you, Emperor, for your kindness. Where is Qin? The emperor is on. The minister is here. A middle-aged man in a green shirt hurried in from outside the hall. Throw these 2 guys out and never step into heaven again. Emperor Zhenwuyang could not doubt it with his hand on his forehead. Qin smiled. Get orders. Then he smiled, flying directly out of the heavenly court like a little chicken, one by one. The veterans of the institute turned their eyes to the scroll again, each with a touch of eagerness. There was no suspense in the end, there was a change, and it was broken by 2 guys who didn't follow the rules, and everything became interesting. Since the expansion of Tianyu to the extreme, Zhenwuyang became the emperor, and these veterans have not fought any wars, that is, they haven't even used their strength for a long time. According to the rules, Shou Yuan day after day seems to be stirred up with a little interest. They are all looking forward and curious. In the heaven realm, more than 10 Yanxian who came to contain were solved, and Jian Wushuang slowly spit out a sigh of breath and brought the Tai Luo Excalibur back into the sheath. Brother Jian, it is really powerful. Xiao Dijun looked at him with a slight smile, and there was some blood on his pale face. Jian Wushuang waved his hand. If conditions permit, cutting the grass is the best decision to avoid uncontrollable changes in the future. The little emperor nodded his head, and he found that some of his views actually coincided with Jian Wushuang's ideas. In order to avoid a change in the following journey, As early as this battle started, Jian Wushuang had already decided not to let a Yanxian escape, and naturally the little emperor decided to obliterate Fujia. It was the beginning. He kicked towards the strange ape lying on the ground like a hill. Jian Wushuang was crying and laughing. This guy would look at the time like this. As early as the first time he started playing, he lay on the ground and pretended to die. I noticed that the crisis was lifted. This big guy hurriedly climbed up. His dragon-like head actually looked at Jian Wushuang with some flattering. "Hey, I'm your master. You have to know who is pleased," Xiaotajin said dissatisfiedly. Jian Wushuang strode directly on the back of the strange ape. At this moment, a layer of colorful ripples wafted across the heavenly realm, and a towering pillar of sky-high giant pillars reached the dome. Xian Tao appeared. The little emperor said softly. Jian Wushuang also noticed the colorful pillars, and the calm heart platform also fluctuated a bit. The level of dynamism is very special, but it seems to fit a certain shackles. It is a great temptation for every Yanxian. And Xian Tao's present life means that more intense competition has begun. Cheesy won the peach before it officially started. Chapter 4731. In this vast expanse of heaven, almost at the same time that the sky-high pillar was ascended, nearly 100 bodies carried the general trend and swept away from the wild and the wild. Congratulations to the 4 sons who won Xian Tao. Amidst the misty mountains and rivers, a handsome young man dressed in white clothes and standing on the top of the mountain holds a fairy peach in the color of glass in his hand. Behind him stood nearly 20 powerful Yanxian. And this handsome young man is the 4th brother of Gongzi Yan, also known as Gongzi Qian. Xian Tao exudes a faint breath without interruption. With his 5 senses intuition, he almost rushed to Jiaozhou, the most central part of the heaven realm, to cut the Shinshan mountain and obtain Xian Tao. A smug look rose from the bottom of his eyes, which was also the first time he got Xian Tao. In the previous battles for winning the peach, it was not him but the son who corrected the leader. But this time, I am afraid the winner has changed. Those who can win Xian Tao the first time have almost laid the ground, and even only need to hide it in the next time. Except for the premeditated containment, it would not be too easy to spend 7 days. However, Gongzi Qian did not think that he had won the victory. Each of his brothers is not a fuel-efficient lamp. Both strength and appeal are extremely strong. It's almost 20 days now. Except for the big brother who has almost no threats, I am afraid that the Yanxian who have participated in this battle for the peach will probably have split into several camps. Thinking of this, Gongzi Qian stretched out his hand to draw a breath from Xian Tao and gave it to a Yanxian beside him. "Bring this breath, you will leave here, how far you go, and at the same time look for Gongzi Yan along the way, try to make him the target." The middle-aged Yanxian heart grasped the magical power and used a little magical power to transform the breath in his hand into the appearance of Xian Tao. "For sons, rest assured, let us do the rest." Gong Ziqian nodded with satisfaction. More than 20 Yanxian behind him were divided into 2 teams. One team followed him, the other team escorted the fake Xian Tao away. Immortal Cloud is vast, he did not stay at all, carrying 12 Yanxian ready to leave. At this moment, a sense of crisis of great terror suddenly surged from behind. "Father, what are you going to do in such a hurry?" It was a little thin, with a shadowy figure in his eyes slowly coming out of the Zonglin, and he was alone. But only such a figure appeared, but it made all Yanxian like enemy. Gong Ziqian's pupils shrank suddenly, as if he saw the most unwilling to face. In this battle for the peach, in addition to the son's correction, there are 2 people who make him most afraid. One is Gong Ziyu, and the other is the figure at the moment. There is no reason for him, and there are rumors that the 2 of them have realized their respective fairy styles. Once you realize the fairy style, even if there is only a trace, it means that you have taken that step, and only waiting for the opportunity to arrive, you can completely go to the next level. Originally thinking that at least 2 or 3 days later, they would find that they had chased one of the toughest guys without thinking for a long time. Gongzi Qian smiled stiffly. "It turns out to be the 5th brother. Why, did you detect the breath of Xian Tao?" The solitary son Mo apparently did not want to speak more, reaching for his finger directly, and his voice was low. Fourth brother, hand Xian Tao to me. I will let you leave, and it is better to be expelled on the spot. There was a touch of disgust in Gong Ziqian's eyes. It's up to you? Do you know how many Yenxian are stuck around you? I advise you how far you can roll, and I will save myself later. It seems that there is no negotiation. Young Master Mo spread his hand, with a sneer in his eyes. Do it. With Gong Ziqian's anger, all Yenxian all left, and the majestic Yanli turned into a dense net and turned down towards the sun's ink pocket. Mob. Taking the sun ink as the center, the dark blue crystals were suddenly refracted throughout the air, just like the ripples on the lake, and began to move regularly. At the same time, young Master Mo's palm strokes a long whip, which is 100 feet long and is formed by the condensation of dark blue crystals, and falls from the ripples. A faint burst of detachment suddenly burst into the sky. The long whip stopped and the unimaginable potential energy was rippled and scattered. For those who approached, almost in a face, the body of the shattered, and then the white light flashed away from the heaven. Young Master Mo held this crystal long whip, and the whole body seemed to be surging with location and terrible energy. Every time the long whip was thrown, it was able to directly defeat a Yenxian. Each of them belongs to the Yenxian who exist in the top of the heaven, but they are difficult to resist even the hit of the sun. But it was tens of hours, 12 Yenxian, all under the attack of Gongzi Mo, all out. A stream of cold sweat flowed out from Gongzi Qian's temples, and it all happened so quickly that he was too late when he had the idea of escape. Gongzi Mo's companion came out of the darkness at this time and blocked his way. Father, let Xian Tao hand in, I will let you two leave. The young son Mo said softly. The crystalline long whip in his hand was like a dragon, entrenched behind him, and the situation was magnificent. 4 sons, give it to him, leaving Qingshan without worrying about firewood. Gongzi Qian's companion whispered. He gritted his teeth without saying a word. If Xian Tao was handed over, it was almost declared to be out of disguise. In the later period, the peach contenders would only be able to choose from the 3 of Gongzi Jiao, Gongzi Yu and Gongzi Mo. After a moment, Master Z decided to grind his teeth and threw the fairy peach in his arms to Master Z. Looking at the precious light flowing in the hand, the fairy peach with the rainbow shadows, the youngster Mo smiled secretly and then put it in his arms. Large companion, let's go. Young Master Qian didn't mean to stay at all, and his feet suddenly lifted up, but the next moment, the crystal long whip that was entrenched in the air shot up and pulled directly Gongzi Qian, with his companion. Before they even made a sound, they disappeared completely. Everything seemed as if nothing had happened. The silence was at its extreme. At this broken mountaintop, only 2 figures were left at the moment. The corners of Gongzi Mo's mouth were traced with a smile, and his figure disappeared. Everything is silent again. And not far from this broken mountaintop, under a huge cliff, a strange ape was curling in between, and the 2 wheels were full of tension in their big eyes. Lying on the body of the strange ape, witnessing all of Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan, all at the moment were dignified, apparently shocked by Master Mo's fierce means. Chapter 4732. 10 breathing time, with one's own strength, wipe out the 12 Yenxian. What kind of existence can this be so freehand? Even sword warriors, when facing dozens of Yanxians encirclement, they can only go roundabout, and it is almost impossible to do so easily. But the impossible scene actually happened. Jian Wushuang and Xiaodigen came to the place under the leadership of the strange ape only a moment after the appearance of Gongzi Mo. After wanting to take advantage of both defeats, he and his 2 fishermen took advantage of them and snatched Xian Tao, but did not expect to see this shocking scene. As a result, he also had a preliminary judgment on the son Mo who had never felt a sense of existence. Is this guy strong? It's ridiculous. Jian Wushuang looked at Xiao Dijuan, his face dignified. A little meaning flashed in the eyes of the little emperor. It seems that they have also been breaking through. When he was about to speak, There was a powerful force on the broken mountain. Immediately afterwards, the sun came to here with more than 20 yen xian. Feeling the fluctuation of the strength in the air around him, the sun's eyebrows condensed into the word chuan. Obviously there was a fight here not long ago, but he came a step late. Xian Tao, just in Jiaozhou, he shouldn't go far, hell find it for me. The sun murmured. A group of yen xian behind him, even if the life was led scattered to the entire Jiaozhou. Jian Wushuang and Xia Audijin rode on the head of the strange ape and hid under the cliff, ready to wait for the sun to get away, and then continue to move. But at the next moment, the frank ape, who had been honestly holding his breath, suddenly snorted. Julie directly flicked the two in a state of ignorance, and then fell behind him unfairly. The sun, who was in deep contemplation, was suddenly taken aback, turned around and saw the duo who didn't know when they appeared, his face blank and alert. "It's you, Gongzi Yan?" The two were also very confused, and could not imagine that they would meet in this way. The little emperor quickly calmed down and looked calmly at the sun. "What about me?" It seemed that he thought of something, and Gong Zizing began to examine the two of them. "Is Xian Tao not in your hands? How about now, are you qualified to take it away?" Xiao Daijin's eyes showed disdain. The sun smiled coldly and smiled. "I still have some scruples in the heavenly court, but in this world, we will calculate the old account and the new account together." "It's you alone?" Little Emperor's eyes were lightly contemptuous and disdainful throughout. It seemed that he felt humiliation, and the sun sighed and shouted, and a strong force of urgency rushed up, stirring the Zonglin earthquake. At the same time, the white robe Yenxian behind him also naturally marked the sword Wushuang. The four figures are about to start a war. The strange ape is lying on the cliff, and it seems to be preparing for a sneak attack. But in the blink of an eye, the prince's breath rose to the peak, and Sin Lung's gaze almost swallowed the entire little emperor. Just before the inevitable hands-on, a sudden voice sounded. "Hey, you are here too." Xiaodijin and Gongzi Jiao looked at the voice at the same time. I saw a handsome young man in a white shirt, thin and young, and flew over. There was absolutely no consciousness to retreat. "What are you doing here?" The young man wared vigilantly and secretly improved his strength. The handsome young man scratched his head. "Of course I came to Xian Tao. Just now my partner said that there was a vision in Jiaozhou." The sun corrected. "Are you afraid of sending you out now?" Then I will go first, you continue." Jun Lang Youth grinned, and hurriedly urged his partner to leave quickly. With the sudden blending of this handsome young man, this inevitable battle stopped tacitly. They all have concerns, such as the birth of Xian Tao in Jiaozhou, the center of the world, and the rest of the emperor and Yen Xian are also coming gradually. If the two defeats at this moment are both injured, they will be extremely passive in the next competition. With a wave of his sleeves, the sun looked at Xiao Dijuan coldly, and then turned away. The entire Jiaozhou seemed to be quiet again. "It's not too late, we have to leave to find Gongzi Mo quickly." Xiao Dijuan turned to look at Jian Wushuang. He nodded and looked around for a week when he found no hidden ambush. He waved and picked up the strange ape who was still lying on the edge of the cliff. "Let's expose it again next time. Be careful to put you on the fire and bake it." After slamming the big guy's head hard, Jian Wushuang didn't have a good air. The strange ape heard the words and hurriedly shook his huge head, looking at him kindly. Regarding this strange ape, when he was rushing to Jiaozhou, the two of them were ready to put it back, but accidentally discovered that it had a keen sense of Xian Tao's breath and great crisis, and naturally continued to carry this big burden. Sitting on the back of the strange ape again, the two followed the route where the sun Mo disappeared and pursued it. "Brother, long time no see." As we traveled through the mountains and forests for a long time, one did not know where to start, and an abrupt voice resounded in my ears. Jian Wushuang's heart was fixed, and he looked subconsciously to his side. I saw the handsome young man who had left before. At this moment he didn't know where he got out of it, and he looked at Xiaodijin and grinned. A slender soft sword was pulled out suddenly, straight forward, and he would pierce his neck by an inch. The Junlang youth hurriedly retreated, giving way to a safe distance. "How far? how far away, dare to step forward and die? Xiao Dijuan glanced coldly at him, riding lightly. He smiled awkwardly. In fact, brother, I am not malicious to you, I just want to tell you, it is best not to compete with the second brother for their fairy peach. Their strength and state are only a line away from the elders. I am afraid of you. The little emperor looked at him sharply and looked at him. If you talk more, I will cut your tongue now. Junlang Youth Helpless had to leave with his partner. As he was about to leave, he suddenly turned back and said, "Come on, brother, no matter what, I will try my best to help you when I win the peach." After saying this sentence, the figure of the handsome young man disappeared without a trace. The little emperor looked like he didn't hear, and looked forward, calm and abnormal. This little brother is not bad, but also yours? Jian Wushuang turned around and asked. 7 sons, the sun is coming. The little emperor seemed unwilling to mention the identities of the various emperors, and after expressing his identity, he remained silent. Jian Wushuang did not have much interest in knowing this. After a simple nod, he entered Wu sit on the back of this strange ape. It has been more than 1 month since the battle for the peach, and the owner of Xiantao has already known who it is. The only thing that matters now is how to wander among these powerful and perverted emperors and seize Xiantao. Chapter 47-33. Judging from the previous performances of Master ZMO, I am afraid that Jian Wushuang will not have much assurance to win. Coupled with the sun and other remaining emperors, they want to seize Xiantao from them and keep them for 7 days, which is far more difficult than imagined. By mistakenly hitting and catching a strange ape that is extremely sensitive to the breath of Xiantao, this saves the sword Wushuang 2 people a lot of time. They only need to sit on the back of the strange ape to get close to the target. In the following journey, Jian Wushuang and Zai Audijin sent away more than 20 Yenxian outs. With the previous warning from the Emperor Zhenuyang, he and the 2 had a little restraint, and they no longer focused on killing. Anyone who did not actively provoke provokers was too lazy to stop. At the same time, the young man Mo, who had Xiantao hidden, was about to step out of Jiaozhou, and a crisis of carrying the general situation came. Before seeing nearly 30 Yenxian encircled, a young man with the same heroic appearance as his son also followed. This time, it was the turn of the pupils Ink Pupils, and the pupil Yu Ziyu. If Jian Wushuang is here, he can surely find that this young man called Gong Ziyu is the guy who was beaten by the little emperor in the heavenly court that day. 5 brother, don't come unharmed. Young Master Yu pulled the corner of his mouth and said with a smile. Gong Ziyu did not answer. After taking a deep breath, he prepared to leave with his companion. Since the 5th brother is going so anxiously, leave Xiantao and go. Young Master Yu slowly stretched out his palm. His face changed slightly, and then he gritted his teeth. Xiantao gives you, let me go. Naturally I can do it. Then a slap-sized package was thrown directly by the Suninchick towards the Suninfeather. There was an eager flash in Gong Ziyu's eyes, and he stretched out his hand to catch the package, but then he frowned. In the same moment, Gong Zmo suddenly burst into unmatched strength and went straight to the sky to plunder. Knowing that he was fooled, the Sun Ziyu directly crushed the parcel wrapped with stones in his hand. All for me. He far underestimated the terrible energy of more than 30 Yenxian, and also overestimated himself. It's almost 100 miles to escape, and all the retreat around the body is cut off. Countless majestic forces are connected to each other, which can be revealed. Even if he realizes the foundation of the fairy style, it will not help. Dark blue crystals began to appear in the air, and at the same time a long whip like a dragon fell in the hands of Sun Mo. He was still not ready to compromise and was struggling with the final. Young Master Mo, is your brain kicked by a donkey? Don't forget everything we have done. Now you are going to look back at me for a fairy peach? The young man's eyes were murky and he growled angrily. Master Mosi was unimpressed. I will give Xiantao to you and I will definitely be out of the game, so do you think I will give it to you directly? If you want, just come and get it yourself. There was a touch of disgust in Gong Ziyu's eyes. His right hand was directly grasped in the void, and a long sharp sword came to the fore. In the face of Gong Ziyu, Gong Zmo didn't have a half chance. By virtue of his own understanding of a trace of immortality, he can expel Gong Ziqian out of the game. It is conceivable that the male Ziyu who has been immersed in the fairy style for a long time will be a blow to him. Rao is so, he did not intend to give up Xiantao Arch. As long as 100 feet, the long whip like a dragon is the first to launch an offensive, enough to tear the whip blade of any situation, leaving a faint white mark in the heavens and smashing towards the male Ziyu. Without the unfavorable whip, he encountered a hard stubble for the first time. A sword mountain is the head, and the male Ziyu directly used the almost complete fairy style and attacked it. At the moment, the space around them seems to reflect a diamond-shaped colorful Chinese mangosteen, which directly engulfed and resolved the swift and fierce offensive. At the same time, a thorny needle-like thorn emerged from each diamond-shaped huang, with hundreds of millions of strands. This sturdy mangi came down with Jianshan's heavy cover, and easily sat off the long whip of the sun's ink, strangling his breath. Hua Mang flashed, and he disappeared with his companion, and he was out. A fairy style containing unique and hegemonic energy is used. When the ink of the sun is easily erased, the son of Yuzi is also stressed. He panted slightly, reached out to grab the fairy peach that fell to the ground, and was ready to leave without stopping for a moment. At this time, the abrupt but familiar opening speech sounded from the ears, making the heart of Gong Ziyu sink heavily. Third brother, don't come unharmed. The younger son drifted from the dark, with a bit of teasing in his eyes. Gong Ziyu looked at him. You kept up with it earlier, right? Have you been hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity? Yes, I did come before you, but you are too anxious, so I will let you perform more. Now, it's time for me to harvest. The younger corrected his smile, and stretched out his palm as he had done before. Do it. How could Gong Ziyu wait for his death, and with a direct order, more than 30 yenxian moved, and directly welcomed the more than 10 yenxian brought by Gongzi. Since the beginning of the battle for Peach, the most fierce battle has begun. At the first time when the scene was chaotic, Gong Ziyu was pregnant with Xiantao, ready to escape. It's just that the next scene made his mood fall to the bottom. Young Master Hua? Young Master Yu gritted his teeth. Do you want to blend in too? The noble figure of the prince, Hua, is called, and his brows are light. Gong Ziyu heard the words and sneered. Yongzi Hua, even if Xiantao falls into your hands, do you think you can have it for yourself? Do you think that Gongzi will let you go? Gongzi Hua shrugged. I can't control that much. Now when it's urgent, remove Xiantao from your hands and piggyback you out. With his voice falling down, there are also more than 20 yenxian appeared, joined the battle. A veil of celestial power followed. The son's wrist shook, and his sharp sword was directly torn. Regarding the enclosing Prince Hua, Prince Yu is not afraid. He has mastered a fairy style. In addition to the impenetrable second elder son, he can stand proudly among the 7 disciples. He is worried that once he enters the melee, his advantage will be completely lost, and it is likely that he will miss Xiantao again. Therefore, dogfight is the most unwilling situation that Gong Ziyu sees, full of too much uncertainty. In addition to the young Emperor Yanzi who has never appeared, and the 7 younger sons, the 3 emperors have already carried out the most intense competition. After smashing a yenxian with one palm, Gong Ziyu, no matter what else, fled the battle directly. That you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.